April 25th, 2024, 38th anniversary of Chernobyl. And there's a lot of people out there, experts in fact, academics, professors, alumni, the deans of the university that will tell you that it's like a banana, it's like a potato chip, or it's like walking in the sunshine, or flying on an airplane, or climbing a mountain, or eating peanut butter, for goodness sakes, or 15 minutes in a kayak. That's what Chernobyl's like. But actually they're lying. And 99% of them will tell you that particular lie. And I do believe I'm the only site that's going to tell you the truth. That's probably the saddest statement imaginable. So don't forget to click a few clickety around the site a little tiny bit. That's a radioactive fallout map of Chernobyl to your left. And it's the old map, right? But the model will actually cover the whole planet. Everything gets covered in radioactive fallout. And pictures above my head, my big head, are some of these helicopters were only used once, and they were so radioactive people couldn't get back in them. And same thing with these tanks. This is just a fraction of the equipment that was abandoned because it's radioactive. Because it's not like a banana or a potato chip or walking in the sunshine or anything like that. And they estimated 1 million people died, but that would mean there's about close to 100 million or even 1 billion people that would have got sick. Heart problems and liver problems and lung problems and respiratory and pituitary and thyroid, adrenaline. They actually closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom because of Chernobyl. And so, but the poll tonight also, and I'm not trying to downplay Chernobyl, we're here to talk about Chernobyl, and Chernobyl is brutal. Despite Chernobyl's deadly effects, should it be demoted to the second worst nuclear meltdown after Fukushima? And we'll explain that as we go through the show. But Fukushima, or Chernobyl, was a single reactor, but they closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. The plume covered the whole planet, and well, they'll tell you it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and sleeping next to somebody or climbing a mountain or in a canoe or eating peanut butter or everything else. It's simply not true. And so what I'm going to do is take you through a bunch of studies, a whole lot of studies, and you can see all the facets that they studied. They spent enormous amounts of money on each of these studies. Now, if you have a coal plant breakdown or a gas plant breakdown or an oil plant, power plant's breakdown, any other power plant, no matter what it is, breaks down, you're not going to see any of these studies. All of these studies are unique to the nuclear breakdown. And nuclear is the most hideous thing imaginable when you actually... And tonight, like if this is your first time ever seeing this kind of information about Chernobyl, then you're going to be the smartest man in your community, or girl, or person. After you watch this, you'll be extremely articulated on nuclear and its harmful effects. The distribution of chromosome damage. Oh, that don't sound like a banana to me. The first responders that were jacked off the streets at gunpoint had to make their own lead vest. And these people in particular were going out on the roof for 15 minutes, or 25 seconds. And that was it. Then they went home. And so they got such an incredible dose. Every one of them got a small stipend each month for the rest of their life, a small pension. but it doesn't cover their basics or anything. But it was recognized that they were harmed. And many of them died soon after and during it, that particular facet of it. And we'll talk about it a little bit more. Genetic disorders in house mouse germ cells after Chernobyl. So they study, what you want to take away from this is so important, is you got to take away, all of these people are got to, in the blue, you see their names will be highlighted in blue. They have to pay mortgages. They got to send their children to hockey and baseball and soccer and martial arts and universities and blah, 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 blah. So they have to make a lot of money to do these, to tell. And most of these studies are meant to downplay Fukushima in one way or many ways. Some of them are honest, and it's very rare. But when you finally go through this video, what you'll come to a realization is this radioactive fallout, per se, which permeates every facet of your life worldwide. Aerosol concentrations near Chernobyl. So you've done all of these studies. Now, this is one of the helicopter pilots. You can see he's lost a leg already. All of them died. There were 600, a little over 600 helicopter pilots after Chernobyl. Every one of them died within about 2 weeks. Assessments of radiation doses to the aquatic organisms in the Chernobyl contaminated area. Now, as we start going through this, we'll be looking at stuff worldwide, and you'll see the same kind of studies. And then you're left with this real important question now. Is there anything more important than stopping this industry from exterminating every species? Everything with any replicating cells whatsoever, which is everything, has no autoimmune defense against it. Hot particles from Chernobyl. These people were on the roof for 25 seconds, and their job was to shovel up a bit of graphite and throw it off the roof and then run back as fast as they could and get on the bus and go home and never come back again. 25 seconds. But because you're getting hit with these gamma shines, these x-rays, these neutron bombardments, these beta rays that are so damaging, it's hard to comprehend, that if you stay there, say, for 5 minutes, your organs will melt and you'll fall over and die. Let's put it that way. Your organs will melt from these shines, these gamma bursts, these neutrons, these beta rays. Lessons of Chernobyl commentary. Again, every helicopter pilot died. Everybody on the helicopters died. So it can't be just the helicopter pilots. It has to be everybody else. But all 600 helicopter pilots died. So how many other people were on the helicopters besides the pilots? I know what you're saying. Well, Dana, they could have got Spider-Man to do it or the Hulk to do it, Dana. I agree. But they didn't, because they're not real. They were created by the industry to make you and your loved ones complacent so they can have their way with destroying the ecosystem. And then it's reinforced constantly and everywhere you look. Simulations of the Chernobyl accident. They have studied it in every way, and many ways you can't even imagine. And you'll see radioactivity in breast milk and the percentages during the years after Chernobyl. And so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people in that study. And if you just done a tally of all the studies and the people on these studies that I'm showing you tonight, it's insane. It's an impact on Austria. Of course, Austria had unbelievable amount of abortions and birth defects and congenital malformations. So every helicopter pilot died within a couple of weeks. And anybody that was on the roof of the exploder building alongside the reactor 4 got an unbelievable... And the equipment they're wearing is literally useless. Better than nothing, but it's useless. It shows the contempt that they didn't go out themselves. The nuclear scientists are not the people on the roof. They jacked those people off the street at gunpoint. Sources of inflow in nature of redistribution of strontium-90 in salt lakes of the Crimea. So they're studying all of these bizarre facets where radiation is. All it is where radiation is. Radiation damage aspects of the Chernobyl accident, it's everything. Disposition of artificial radionuclides from atmospheric nuclear weapons test. Estimated by soil inventories in French areas low impacted by Chernobyl. Well, the French Alps had hotspots from Chernobyl, actual hotspots. Lethal hotspots. Comment on the abundance of birds in Fukushima's judged from Chernobyl. So this was meant to downplay the damage, because the birds literally disappeared out of Fukushima, and the studies in Chernobyl, these are migratory birds that have, and the migratory animals, the migratory birds, that's an instinct. They're not just wandering around. This is an instinct, and it's programmed in them, these creatures, through millions of generations of these species. It's ingrained. It's indelibly imprinted into their souls, and they follow these migratory paths, and there's nothing they can do about it. It's literally like magic in many ways, right? Radiation burden due to fallout in Austria from Chernobyl. Radiocesium from Chernobyl and the Swedish moose. They actually closed all the freshwater fishery in Sweden for 30 years after Chernobyl, because, it's like a banana and a potato chip. Inoculation does not improve the cesium uptake in crops grown and so when they talk about that they can put potassium in the fields instead of the fields taking up cesium, it'll take up potassium. I mean, this is the biggest scam imaginable, because there's 1,000 isotopes. And even if potassium could have an attribute like that, which it doesn't, the plant is still going to uptake all the other radionuclides. And so the majority of the studies that you're going to see when they acknowledge cesium only, which is what that study is doing, then that's meant to manipulate you, deceive you, and coerce you into eating radioactive food from a nuclear wasteland so that they can get a big paycheck. Catchment scale disposition and redistribution of Chernobyl radionuclides in upland Britain. Which is like such a strange story, because Britain had a nuclear meltdown of a plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor in 1959 in wind scale. They changed the name because of the crimes they had committed. They changed the name to Sellafield after. And they had took buses and went to the theaters and stole the people from the back rows of the theater in 1957, actually, I think that was. Because remember, back in them days, the poor sat in the back, right, of the theaters. Catchment scale disposition, redistribution of Chernobyl radionuclides in upland Britain. But they closed 9,400 farms in Britain, which means you should have abandoned, not just Britain, but Scotland, UK, Ireland. So they should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom because of Chernobyl fallout. Because you don't close 9,400 farms and from fallout and not contaminate all the water, everything else. See? The very air is contaminated. Structural features and bioremediation activities. Again, when they do studies on stuff that boggles the mind. Transfer of cesium from Chernobyl debris and nuclear weapons fallout to different Swedish population groups. The nuclear weapons fallout was what they call testing, but that wasn't a test, that was a war. Each nuclear weapon is the same weapon you're going to use in a nuclear war. The radioactive fallout is the same fallout. It was insidious what they actually done with these. It was It was an agenda, right, to poison the entire planet. And you can trace the decline of the species directly back to the nuclear weapons so-called testing. The French Polynesians, for instance, from the French nuclear weapons testing, went out and destroyed the French Polynesian ecosystem and the health and the genetics. It was equal to a Nagasaki bomb every week for 12 years. And even today, they refuse to acknowledge that there's any adverse side effects from this radiation. But they store iodine pills for radiation to their own population. The transfer of cesium and strontium-90 to dairy cattle. Well, if cesium and strontium is going to transfer, so is uranium, plutonium, americium, neptunium, the xenon, the krypton, everything else. The dairy cattle fed fresh herbage collected 3.5 kilometers from Chernobyl. Nobody should be collecting anything 3.5 kilometers away because it's an exclusion zone. But the transfer of cesium to the dairy cattle fed, look at all the people in the study right there in the blue. Oh, yeah, I'm thirsty tonight. Fresh water does it. Testing of a food chain model using Chernobyl 137 cesium fallout data and considering the effects of the countermeasures. So there is no countermeasures. And this is from the Science of Total Environment 2003. But you can't countermeasure radioactive fallout in crops. And so whenever you hear that connotation, that's a despicable lie. It's an unbelievable lie. They told so many lies you can't keep up with the industry unless you're at this all day, every day. And even then you still get overwhelmed. Biological dosimetric to assess risk of health effects in victims. Like, the risk is if you get a single atom in your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. Excuse me. Right, your body attacks it for the rest of your life with white blood cells. Bear with me. Now, I had a nuclear news cycle ready for tonight, but I don't believe that's the right thing to do. So this is supposed to be the elephant foot. It's supposed to be hundreds of tons. Does that look like it's hundreds of tons? But the majority of the population thinks that that's the elephant foot from Chernobyl. Oh, that's all the nuclear reactor cores right there. That's what they think that is. But some media went to hell with it and they superimposed somebody in a, like, the stupidest suit imaginable to be around. Like, so this was the original picture. But that's kind of like a well behind you. That's a leaning rail. So that tells you how big it is. Does that look like hundreds of tons? So what they done was they darkened the picture up. And then they just put somebody in a green screen. Like, this is me right there, right? And so when you can put... That's me in a different paper suit. And so this, you can't go there and survive. That's a lethal dose. Right, so you got a white suit there, you got a grayish kind of suit there. So there's no way you can survive in that environment.
And you know well at Chernobyl, the helicopter pilots that came in and that deposited the heavy materials to try to put down that fire, which was a very different kind of event than what we're looking at now, but still there were helicopters and the pilots all died from radiation exposure.
That's Harvard University, right?
It was heroism.
During this operation, 600 pilots are fatally contaminated with radiation. All of them will die. But their efforts only buy a few days. Although it has been covered over, the fire still isn't out.
So like Chernobyl's no paper towel. But compared to Fukushima, Chernobyl barely registers. But 3 million children require treatment. That's permanent. Once you get poisoned by radiation, it's permanent. Many will die prematurely. Chernobyl poisoned the whole planet, but it was a graphite reactor. It wasn't like reactor 4 at Fukushima 3 was a plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor. And Chernobyl was a new reactor, 2 years old, and didn't have any fuel in the pools. But Fukushima had 8 reactor cores at the top of each building. And each reactor core in Japan is much bigger.
The fact that the reactor in Japan is 100 times more powerful than the one in Chernobyl,
and so each reactor core is 100 times Chernobyl because it's pure uranium, pure plutonium. Now, I'm not trying to downplay Chernobyl, I'm trying to make a point. And Chernobyl was 4 of those reactors, and each one is 100 times Chernobyl. But there was 8 reactor cores in the fuel pools, 4 decades in the fuel pools at the top of each reactor core. It's equal to about 4,000 Chernobyls. That's what Fukushima is. But get a load of how crazy Chernobyl actually was. Chernobyl was brutal and still is. Impaired swimming behavior of the sperm from barn swallows. It's Tim Masur. Now, he's done a lot of studies on the birds, right? And I remember a number of years, probably 6 years ago or something, 7, 8 years ago, I was getting these emails that Tim was going to replace some of the mouthpieces in the nuclear industry out there, and he'd asked me what I thought about it, and I blew up laughing because we got videos of Tim not being very honest at all. 90 strontium migration to the geosphere from a waste burial in a Chernobyl exclusion zone. So they've studied so many facets. And you have to apply it to every nuclear site that they need to do the same studies at every nuclear power plant because the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem. Investigation of food contamination since the Chernobyl fallout in Austria. Well, it covered the whole planet. The plumes covered the entire planet right away. Time-dependent behavior of radiocesiums. The majority of the studies will only talk about cesium. Apparently, it's very difficult to get funding to study anything else unless you're a well-known apologist and you're going to utilize that to downplay it. A new method to compare the mobility of weapons tests in Chernobyl-derived fallout. So all I want you to think about is, why are they studying all of these different facets in all these different countries worldwide? And then the obvious reason is because it's so harmful in such a small amount and for such a long time, and that it actually happened. The kinetics of the particles of the irradiated Chernobyl nuclear fuel and the release of the radionuclides in contaminated soil at Chernobyl. Well, the studies clearly show it covered the whole planet. Mini and microsatellite mutations in children from Chernobyl accident cleanup workers. 3 million children required permanent health care because of Chernobyl. Agricultural recovery of a formerly radioactive area. You can't, and this was flaxseed development, a remediated Chernobyl area. And look at the people that participated in the study in the bottom. You can't remediate a nuclear wasteland. It simply can't be done. You have to dig up the top 5 feet. You have to take every tree, every bush for 1,000 square miles and edit the ground and store it somewhere. And then you're left with this big hole 5 feet in the ground by 1,000 miles. And so the radioactive fallout from all the nuclear power plants worldwide will never stop, so it'll be contaminated within a week again. Hot particles in the soil from Chernobyl. Chernobyl-related ionizing radiation exposures and cancer risk. They talk about a mechanism for radiation adaptation, just as a question. Whenever you see stuff like that, these are professional lawyers. There's nothing on the planet that has an autoimmune trigger to defend against radiation. So what they're talking about is like Spider-Man or the Hulk stuff and Superman, right? But in real life, this is not. It simply doesn't work that way. These are terrible people that would write those types of studies. And the idea is to dilute the reality to the point where people can't tell the difference, right? Iodine-129, cesium-137, Chernobyl contaminated soil or chemicals. Again, ecosystem remediation in radioactivity polluted areas. Ecosystem remediation. Well, you can't. You can't remediate a nuclear meltdown area. It just can't be done. And you can fake it. They're very quite good at it, faking it, but you can't physically remediate it. Radiation-induced cardiac valve disease in a man from Chernobyl, but we see that now as exponentially exploding worldwide. A very strange place, Chernobyl exclusion zone. Cryogenic study from children exposed to ionizing radiation after Chernobyl. Cortisol treatment on free radical oxidation in traumatized cleanup workers 30 years after. These are guinea pigs, what they're talking about. Whenever you see this on the victims, it's guinea pigs, what we're talking about. That's the only reason they're doing it. They know this is not going to help them, but they got money and to do the study, and now they're going to go do that particular study. Gamma dose rates from terrestrial and Chernobyl radionuclides inside outside settlements in the Brinks region after Chernobyl. Fuzzy human reliability analyst on the Chernobyl accident. The whole system is stacked against you. The whole academic community is out to get you. They're making money, making studies to downplay Fukushima. But what you take away from this, why is there so much money available? Why do they study every facet of the ecosystem? And this is a legacy of nuclear, by the way. There's more studies done on anthropogenic man-made radiation elements than there is on the solar system, the stuff from the solar system that we are made of, right? The stardust that we are made of. And so that tells you right away how much influence the nuclear industry has on your academics, on your universities, on your governments to fund this stuff. There's 4.3 million studies a year in North America on nuclear. 4.3 million studies done every year. The majority of them, the larger percentage is going to be on nuclear, rather. Man-made nuclear. And that is one of the most frightening statements imaginable. Bear with me, I gotta get some more pictures set up there. Little slack here. The only problem is I got so much. I got so much. It's the whole. It's insane. It's actually insane. 17 years of follow-up in Latvia. So 17 years of follow-up. It's not like 17 years later follow-up. It's 17 years of studying the cleanup workers, the lab rats. The people that they hijacked off the streets on top of that. And then called them heroes who didn't volunteer. And then were harmed for the rest of it and had a miserable existence for the rest of their life. Chemical forms of gamma-emitting radionuclides in soil adjacent to Chernobyl. Chernobyl resulted in 985,000 deaths worldwide in 2004. This was a. There was 5,500 studies came out of the Soviet Union later, and then they were translated by the New York Medical Journal, I believe it was. And then they were able to extrapolate there's about 1 million people died from Chernobyl. Because not everybody's going to die, not everybody's getting cancer. There's many, many other illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. Residual Chernobyl fallout and solid field pollutants found on the Isle of Man. Chernobyl resistance and cleanup workers who suffered from low doses of radiation. Cleanup workers didn't suffer from low dose radiation. See, that's a pretty evil person to suggest that cleanup workers had a low dose. You can't go anywhere near Chernobyl and not get a high dose. So if you're at the nuclear meltdowns itself, which detonated, that's murder. So to call it low dose radiation, I have zero tolerance for these people. Structural features of human tooth issues affected by high doses of external ionizing radiation after nuclear catastrophe of Chernobyl plant. Structural features of human tooth issues affected by high dose of external ionizing radiation after nuclear catastrophe. So, like, when you look at Britain, a lot of people will, right, they stigmatize Britain saying, oh, Britain's got a lot of bad teeth, right? The reason they do, though, is because they covered up the nuclear meltdown and continued to let people eat the food grown in a nuclear wasteland, and then that came back and destroyed their health. And their tooth is well known to bioaccumulate radiation. Modeling the Chernobyl radioactive fallout, a fractal approach in northern Italy. And they built this sarcophagus, this is what they're calling it rather. You can't contain Chernobyl. Right? You can't 100% contain it because what happened, and they didn't they built this because the original containment wasn't a containment at all. It was more of a shield for anybody around the site, right? But it wasn't meant as a containment. You can't contain it anyway because it all goes down to the water tables. But you also can't contain it because it becomes very volatile, where the hydrogen will build up, it'll displace the oxygen, and if you introduce oxygen into the site or an animal or something, it'll actually detonate, and so it has to be vented. Migration ability of radionuclides in soil vegetation cover of Belarus after Chernobyl. 30 years after Chernobyl, 30 key papers published in the Journal of Environmental Radioactivities. The majority of these studies, by the way, are meant to downplay it. But when you bring it together, they try to downplay every facet of the ecosystem. It couldn't hurt here, and it couldn't hurt there, and they've done that thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Every facet of the ecosystem is studied and is meant to downplay it. So no matter which, if you say, oh, there was damage over here, they'll yank out a study. No, actually it wasn't. If you say it was damaged over there, they say, no, actually it wasn't. They got to study. So they got to study to downplay everything. That's not an accident. That's how far-thinking they actually are. Redistribution Chernobyl-derived radiocesium in the United Kingdom. It never goes away, by the way. Experimental studies of radioactive aerosols in the vicinity of Chernobyl nuclear power plant. Ingestion doses in Finland due to strontium, cesium-134, cesium-137 from nuclear weapons testing. Oh, and the Chernobyl. Why are you doing studies like that? Debate over health effects of Chernobyl reignited. Of course, that's because they produce so many studies to downplay it. When the truth finally starts to come out, they have to come out and vehemently attack it. Groundwater resident time down gradient of trench number 22 at the Chernobyl pilot site. Now look at all the people in this study, right? Meant to downplay the study, downplay the radioactive fallout. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. preface to a special issue 2014 Environmental Radioactivity Legacy Sites like Chernobyl. Cesium fallout from Fukushima rivals Chernobyl. This is New Scientist. New Scientists, everybody at New Scientist should be in jail for the studies they produced. This is just one great big criminal empire. And because Chernobyl is brutal, and we're going to show you that tonight. But Fukushima is 4 reactors, not 1. Fukushima was pure uranium, pure plutonium, not graphite. Much worse, Fukushima. Fukushima had around 8 fuel pools and 2 pools at the top of each of the buildings. Chernobyl never had none of that. Fukushima, multiple reactors and 8 fuel pools are gone. And so they immediately come out and continue to claim that Chernobyl is the world's worst accident. They're still doing that today if you go look it up. And, we got a poll tonight asking that question. Hi, everybody. What have we got done over here? Despite Chernobyl's deadly effects, should it be demoted to the second worst nuclear meltdown after Fukushima? And the idea of these polls is just to educate you. Holy shit, we're cooking tonight. We got 21 people. After a decade of live streaming, we finally got 21 people on my show. And I got 23 likes. That's incredible. And 23 votes on my poll. This is a night to celebrate. I'm going to be giddy all weekend with this much attention. We got studies on Fukushima where the rates of animals and children being born with 1 testicle skyrocketed. But in Chernobyl, he said it wasn't altered at all. And look, the only knowledge, cesium-137, pro-nuclear is basically, if you're trying to single out and figure out who's evil, you put everybody that's pro-nuclear on the list by proxy, right? Iodine-129 in the soil for northern Ukraine, retrospective. When they talk about the dose of iodine-130 exposures, and look at all the people produced in that study, for every iodine-131, there's 10 times more 132, and 30 times more 133. And the 132, 133 iodines are 9 times more effective ionizing and radiating the thyroid glands than the 131 is. And the damage is forever. But you can't have that without all the other isotopes. And so look at all the people. When you see these types of studies, you'll always notice there's a lot of people with their name on the studies. So, and what you're looking at is, why are they studying all of these facets? If it was harmless, if it was innocuous, if it was benign. Soil-dependent uptake of cesium, again, cesium, as if cesium is the only isotope that exists. Experimental studies in the Chernobyl accident areas. A lot of these, they never go there. They just write the paper, and the paper is meant to downplay the new nuclear they want to put in their own country. Long-lived Chernobyl radionuclides in Greece. Chernobyl debris in Denmark. Well, this model doesn't do it justice. It covers any accident will cover the whole planet in about 20 to 30 days. Like a symmetrical blanket of radioactive fallout. Behavior of 110 silver in the environment after Chernobyl. Association of dissolved, which you'll find spiders bioaccumulate 1,000% more than the other insects. Association of dissolved radionuclides released by Chernobyl accident for colloidal materials in surface water. Like, it's not dissolved radionuclides, it's just assimilated into the ecosystem, right? The radionuclide never goes away. You can't destroy it in incinerators. Geochemical influence of waste trench number 22T at the Chernobyl pilot site at the aquifer. Chernobyl is 600 kilometers away from the ocean, but it has major rivers, and they run down to the Black Sea, I think it is. But the airborne particles covered the whole planet within a few weeks. The atmospheric long-range transport and its application to the Chernobyl release. Medical consequences of Chernobyl experiences of 15 years of studies. Bioindication of the anthropogenic effects of micropopulations in the vicinity of the plant for storage and processing of radioactive waste in the Chernobyl nuclear plant zone. They study everything, don't they? Concentration levels of technetium-99 in the forest soil collected within 30 kilometer zones. The World Health Organization, the worst of the worst humans. And Sasakawa Memorial Health Foundation joint project, medical relief for children affected by Chernobyl through the development and implementation of health. So there are these foundations, say from Ireland and Scotland, that and Britain, that go down to Chernobyl and they bring some of them like for a holiday out of the orphanages where they're abandoned. And this is some of those pictures there. But there's orphanage after orphanage after orphanage after orphanage everywhere you go in Belarus and Ukraine of deformed children. And they have nothing. They are abandoned and they have nothing. They have maybe one nurse who's severely overworked for 40 severely harmed. Autism and Down syndrome is the first studies they do after a nuclear accident anywhere worldwide. Mutants and neglections following a low-dose radiation exposures at Chernobyl. 135 cesium, 137 cesium composition environmental samples across Europe. That was Chernobyl, across Europe. So they're doing all of these studies because it's like a banana and a potato chip or walking in the sunshine because it's harmless. Vertical distribution of cesium. Every time and I'm so tired of the word cesium-137. The biggest byproduct of the radiative fuel rods is the curium isotopes, by the way. Let me talk about that for a minute. This industry has gotten away with everything, right? They've never been held accountable. Toxicity of inhaled plutonium dioxide in beagle dogs. Dr. Raymond Gilmedy from Loveless Respiratory Research Institute. 144 beagle dogs with a single inhalation. Because the beagle dog got the big nose, and they're not very aggressive typically, so the scientists are not worried about being bit by them as they kill them, right? Tumors of the lungs, the skeleton, and the liver occur beginning about 3 years after exposure. So there's 3 tumors in each dog typically. And bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death, the bone tumors. The lung tumors in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 dogs. And they occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. And tumors in the 3 organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death. So when you talk about plutonium, you'll see them out there, oh, you can eat plutonium, Dana. And these are scumbags that say stuff like that. The finding in dogs suggests that a similar dose-related biological effect could be expected in humans accidentally exposed to plutonium. But it was discovered that the human kidney are at least 50 times, if not a hell of a lot more, less efficient than an animal's kidney at removing plutonium. In other words, a human is 50 times more vulnerable than the dogs. And the dogs died in every one of the dogs died of tumors, most of it from their skeleton, which means they were also producing mutated stem cells, right? Okay. So whenever you see cesium-137, you got to realize plutonium is a major byproduct too. But the major byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotope. And curium isotope, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. Not cesium, but curium is the biggest byproduct. And curium is 20 times more toxic than the plutonium. Curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the radiated nuclear fuel. And when it comes to alpha emitters, they're a significant fraction. But they're the major byproduct. So forget the fact that they're alphas. Just that first sentence. Curium isotopes are the major byproducts. Not cesium, not iodine, but curium isotopes. And they need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And plutonium killed all the dogs in the studies of multiple tumors. All right, okay. Post-Chernobyl thyroid cancer in children. Tumor suppressing genes of these little mole rats type from Chernobyl, Ukraine. Again, they have studied everything. You can't imagine. And it was all meant to downplay it. They're not getting money to rat out the nuclear industry, okay? They're getting paid to play ball. They're basically lobbyists for the nuclear industry, and they make their money by faking studies. Cancer in children, adolescents, young adults in Russia after Chernobyl. Chromosome aberration test reliability measured genotoxicity of soils of inhabited areas of the Ukraine contaminated by the Chernobyl. Everything was contaminated by Chernobyl. Understanding the legacy of Chernobyl. On the distributions inventories of radionuclides and data sediment around the Swedish coast from Chernobyl, because it washes down from the mountains to your coastline, remember, no matter where you tell. Anthropogenic traces in the bottom sediment of the Chukchi Sea. This is about Chernobyl. The temporal variations of stratospheric fallout derived from Chernobyl. Of stratospheric fallout. It never goes away, literally. Reevaluations of thyroid doses in Russia after Chernobyl. 2002 study. Look at all the people in that study. If you add up all the people in these studies, and you go and you look up every one of them, you'll find a monster. Every one of them. Chernobyl fallout and salt from Poland. Chernobyl revisited it. Yeah, right. Indications of limited altered gene expressions in trees from the Chernobyl regions. Vegetation fires, smoke emissions, dispersions of radionuclides in Chernobyl exclusion zone. So whenever you have a forest fire anywhere on the planet, you're going to liberate decades of radioactive fallout back into the ecosystem because you can't destroy it. It's a perpetual disease factory is the only way to describe nuclear. CC-137 transport from the river is located in Chernobyl areas to the Krev reservoir. So like when you only acknowledge cesium, and that particular study is with an A, cesium, which is a British terminology for cesium, which means this is a British funded influence study. And the British are after Canada, I guess, the British are probably the second worst scumbags in the world when it comes to nuclear cover-ups. They really are degenerates. Like, yeah, there's a lot of scumbags. Well, they're all scumbags in the nuclear industry, but the British and the Canadians are exceptional scumbags. Determination of technetium-99 deposited on the ground within 30 kilometer zones of Chernobyl. Estimations of the technetium-99 released into the atmosphere, which is a half-life of 210 million years, by the way. Or 210,000 years. So you multiply that by 10, 2.1 million years. The role of soil erosion, processes in post-fallout redistribution in Chernobyl cesium-137. Central Russia, studies. Damon hair mutations, bioassay of the mutagenicity of radioisotopes contaminated air following Chernobyl nuclear accident 1 year later. So the air was still contaminated, and the hairs of certain species would pick it up, is what they were basically. Chernobyl catastrophe and the consequences. Springer, Wiley, and I can't remember the other journal. That's weird. The three biggest journals have 22,000 journals, and they get the studies from the universities for free. They get other universities to peer review it for free, and then they lock it up behind a paywall, and they sell it for exorbitant prices. And you can't get access to it unless you're part of the industry on top of that. But you're paying for it. Thyroid cancer incidences in children 0 to 18 in post-Chernobyl in Belarus. Ingestion of Chernobyl 137 cesium in Akita City, Japan, 1990. The variabilities of Chernobyl-derived cesium inventories. Notice how almost everything is cesium? In small agricultural drainage basins in central Russia. They had to create a study to downplay every facet of the ecosystem, and they did. Case control studies of thyroid cancer in young people following Chernobyl. Cancer from children exposed to radiation followed after Chernobyl. Health effects of Chernobyl, fears, rumors, and truth. Like any time that they claim they're the truth and don't give you diversity, be very, very suspect. Summary of the diagnosis of childhood thyroid diseases around Chernobyl. And so a lot of the function was on thyroid, but if you get thyroid problems from radiation, then that means your thyroid is producing radioactive hormones. And so we should see studies. Unfortunately, we don't. We should see a ridiculous amount of studies on how the thyroid mutated to hormones, and they cause debilitating illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses. Again, comparison of thyroid cancers after Chernobyl in Belarus and in Ukraine. So a lot of the studies suggested only thyroid cancer was an issue. There was nothing else happened. But heart problems immediately shows up after nuclear accidents. People drop dead of heart attacks all over. You know, there's one street in Fukushima City, Shopping Street, where 7 people dropped dead in 1 year. The first year, from between 2011 and 2012, on a single street in that nuclear wasteland city that they didn't evacuate, 7 people dropped dead. So Elsfer, Springer, and Wiley gets all of their, oh there you go, I've said it that time. They get all your studies from universities and lock them behind a paywall. And then the universities will buy an allotment from Elsfer, Springer, and Wiley, and they won't buy them, rather they'll rent them. And then the students will have these studies that year to do their courses with, right? And like Harvard spends $4.5 million a year on these studies. But the studies Harvard are teaching their students are completely different than the studies that the local universities are teaching their students. And so the student doesn't get the diversity. They don't get to peruse the journal site. And remember, the 3 biggest ones, Elsevier, Springer, and Wiley, have 22,000 journals between them. So they're only going to get their studies from a single journal. They won't have access to the other 21,999 journals. So they're going to have a prejudice view when they do their studies as a student. They're going to be, it's very coordinated. It's incredible amount of effort. And the idea is to mold a student to the chore that you want to hire them for. Because these people that are going to universities as nuclear are all guaranteed a job. But what is the job? They're already marked. Their personalities are already worked out, and they're marked for certain jobs when they graduate. They're very well taken care of, paid handsomely, and they want to hire arrogant people. They want to hire people that where their parents were monsters, right, in the nuclear industry, and they went to university and got an education to get the same type of jobs. Again, thyroid gland and radiation. Well, the problem with the thyroid gland is you're going to have mutated hormones. The thyroid gland for an adult is 3 by 5 centimeters. A child is only about 2 centimeters. And in Fukushima, there was 16,648 children out of 38,000 with thyroid tumors 2 centimeters or bigger, which is the same size as their thyroid. These are incredible numbers, by the way. It used to be 1 to 2 per million pre-Fukushima. And so when you look at what happened at Chernobyl and how they downplayed it, it's pretty heartbreaking. Like, you can't help but have contempt for the academic when you go down this incredibly dark road of the sinister road that they took in order to get their paychecks. Interaction between uranium and microbacterium, a strain isolated from Chernobyl exclusion zone. Like, they studied, there's nothing here today they haven't studied about Fukushima. Chernobyl's still in the hills. And new scientists are despicable. They should be banned. Like, these are criminals. They have no good intentions whatsoever. And every time you hear the word radiocesium, just despicable people. Concentration factors of Chernobyl contaminated fish. A study on the influence of potassium and blind testing of a previously developed model. So they're like, you can add all the potassium you want. That's not going to get rid of radiation. It's the most insane assertion conceivable. But you're going to see it everywhere. And they do that. They say to the farmer, here, look, put that potassium, spread it around your field, and your food will be okay. You can ship it to market. And then, but we want to know where the food is going, because then they're going to start studying. The first thing they're going to look for 9 months later is autism and Down syndrome. They're going to start doing studies on those communities, right? This is a very, very, very sick industry. The people in it are very sick people. And they got the job because they have that particular mentality. Thyroid cancers in children and adolescents in Belarus. The influence of radiation exposure and the source of the irradiation. So they've done so many studies until they got the result that they wanted, and they used that then in Congress or Senate or in hearings or in criminal cases to downplay any effects of nuclear. And it's very, very important to them too, by the way. Model testing using data on cesium-137, because apparently nothing else exists, from Chernobyl fallout in the input river catchments areas of Russia. Look at all the people in the studies. The accelerated occurrence of age-related changes of organisms in Chernobyl workers, irradiation-induced syndrome, public responses to the Chernobyl accident. And that was very important. This is why they produced a lot of these studies, was if there's any populations that were starting to get upset and educated, they would flood them with these propaganda studies. Comparative radiation impact on biota and the man in the area followed by the accident at the Chernobyl nuclear plant. Radionuclides concentration environmental samples collected around Chernobyl during the International Chernobyl Project. Just bear with me. So, when I'm doing these kind of shows, I like to delete every once in a while the ones I'm covering, so that if I lose my spot, I can find my way back. And I forgot to do it so far tonight, so I just done it. Chernobyl operators, criminals or victims? Well, they're all criminals. and victims. A multi-level analysis of long-term psychological distress among the Belarusians affected by the Chernobyl. Well, it's not a psychological effect, it's a very tangible, it's a very real effect. When the radiation gets in your body attacks the white blood cells for the rest of your life. For a white blood cell to exist, it has to displace a red blood cell, and the red blood cells are the ones that are carrying oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. So if you create enough, it's called leukemia. If you create enough white blood cells from bioaccumulation, that's called leukemia, right? When I was doing research expeditions from Vancouver to British Columbia for 6 years, I was out there on the ocean doing species counts for 4 to 5 months each year. And so I used to end up going in these little tiny outports with no highways, no roads, and completely isolated to get fuel and some groceries. And I used to, I'm on the ocean for 2 or 3 weeks. I got the daylights beat out of me. The internet is attacking me the entire time I'm out there. I'm the worst human ever created. And so whenever I meet anybody in the communities, I would always ask them the same question. Right? Are you seeing a lot of sickness in your community in the last couple of years? Are you seeing, I ask them, is a lot of people dying in the communities? And I try not to lead them, right, basically, but I'm looking for those answers. And uniformly, throughout all the communities, I was hearing the same thing. Cancer is insane. And these are strange cancers we've never seen before, and they die right away within a few weeks or a few months of the diagnosis. And there's one up in the funeral they're burying today or tomorrow, right? Yeah, every single community, and these are little tiny communities. And they come to life right away when you ask them that question, right? Because all of a sudden they realize, wait a second, I never thought about it, right? And they're like, yeah. It's crazy, actually. And these are cancers we've never heard tell of, and rare cancers. And so I learned quite quickly the best person to ask was the oldest people in the community that were mobile, right? That were still getting around, because they knew everybody. They were paying attention. They're not good at asking a kid, because the kid doesn't, they don't really get the bigger picture. You got to ask somebody that has a bond in the community, somebody that has a stake in it their whole life, right? Or lost their loved ones to this. And that used to just terrify me. I used to go back aboard the boat after, and it would haunt me for hours and hours. And so I would listen to lectures or presentations and that of subjects that I'm not familiar with, because that would absorb my mind. Because my mind wouldn't wander as much back to, and it used to terrify me. And I'm like, I really should go home. But if I go home, then we'll never get the research done. And so and I was out there on the west coast, like the open ocean. When a plume comes in, the first spot it hits is that shoreline right there. That's the first shoreline, the open ocean. So when the radiation plume is coming in, and if you're there, you're getting the exceptional dose, right? And it's an extinction event. But we're talking about Chernobyl tonight, and because Chernobyl was an incredible event, but the studies that they done on it was exceptional. They went for it, and it's still going on today. But they can't quite quantify Chernobyl because Fukushima was a pulse event worldwide. So it basically drowned out the single of Chernobyl. So these legacy studies that we have are very important. They're just unbelievably important. They're unimaginably important because they don't have that Chernobyl, Fukushima legacy at that time, right? So these are raw studies. And so when you talk about psychological distresses among the Belarusians, remember there's autism and diabetes, there's dementia, there's autism, there's Down syndrome, there's schizophrenia, there's real mental health issues associated with radiation poisoning. And this is like, we're talking catastrophic. It's catastrophic what we're talking about. And I think this is why I'm still going strong all these years later, is because my brain, when I sit here and do these shows, these are my moments of peace, believe it or not. These are where my brain is like, all the stuff screaming all day long in my head, in my ears, because you got to think about all the voices in my head from all the stuff I'm exposed to. Like about nuclear, right? I have voices in my head because I read prodigiously. I read so much material. It's just incomprehensible how much I've read. And so when I talk about a subject, I got 40 different voices saying, oh. And I don't know which one is the most important one until I open my mouth, and then I'll say whatever that particular voice is screaming at me. Don't forget data dimension. And that's how my brain is actually. So when I sit here, I get some relief because I'm able to, hi, my brain is like, A three-dimensional model for the dispersion of radioactive substances in the marine ecosystem. Hang on here, let me show you. Here's what Fukushima dispersal looked like in the ecosystem, Pacific Ocean, over 6 years. So the studies are meant to downplay it, right? The airborne model that covers the whole planet in 30 days, it means all the water, all the fresh water, everything is contaminated. Worldwide, immediately, within 1 month. Monte Carlo modeling of beta radiometer device used to measure milk contaminated as a result of Chernobyl. No, it's safe. You can give it to your kids. We'll be back to do studies on them later and their kids later after that. It's a sick industry. Plutonium. Oh my God, I'm shocked. He mentioned plutonium in a study. Gee, I don't know what to do now. I'm confused. He actually told the truth. I'm sure they're going to downplay it. Cesium, of course, scumbags. And cesium's a real concern, don't get me wrong. It's just, it's weaponized against humanity and the 8 million species as propaganda. It's a very real concern because it pulses energy 600 feet every second. That's a bad actor, right? And 90 strontium is selected in vertebrates from some areas around the Chernobyl nuclear plant. They have studied everything you can conceive. There's nothing you can dream up. I can't show you a study that they've already done. There's nothing you can tell me. Did you do a study on this? Did you study the... Like whatever you want to say, I got a study that'll say, yeah, they studied it, here it is. Urban-rural differences in the correlates of power suicide in the regions affected by Chernobyl. Well, they abandoned the people, right? People lost all their families, all their friends. They lost their homes. They lost their legacy. They couldn't go back to their graveyards. They couldn't go back. They didn't have any comfort. They were displaced. An invisible war. And then you're just abandoned. Get out. No, you can't take anything with you. Get out. Don't worry. When you get off the bus, somebody will be there to help you. Get off the bus, there's nobody there. And like all your friends are gone. You don't know where they're gone. You'll never see them again. All your loved ones are gone. You don't know where to. You'll never see them again. This is the nuclear industry. It does it everywhere. It's a crime against humanity. Every step, every facet of the industry is. Radioiodine-induced thyroid cancer. You love talking about thyroid. You love talking about iodine, right? And you love talking about cesium. And these are real. These are very tangible for sure. But it's 100% meant to make you think that only the thyroid glands. Studies in the aftermath of Chernobyl. Quantitative assessment of radionuclide migration from near-surface radioactive waste burial sites, the waste dumps in Chernobyl exclusion zone as an example. Because there was a lot, farmers killed their herds and buried them in the ground after Chernobyl, for instance. They killed all the wild animals they can find and buried them in pits. It was really something what they done. Association of renal cell carcinoma and radiation exposures after Chernobyl. Chernobyl. Fallout in the uppermost humus layers of forest soils in Finland, northeast Russia, and the Baltic countries in 2000, 2003. They've studied everything in order to downplay it and in order to know what to look for in the future and quantify it. More studies that they can take from the government coffers and burn money on it. But none of this is meant for you. That's what makes this show so unique. None of these studies were ever meant to be seen by you. I call them ticker tape studies, right? We just cover the headlines. But because when you string them all together like we got done tonight, the headlines is all you need. And it's way better to study all of these headlines than it is to study a couple of studies in detail, right? It's way better. Because you're seeing this relentless, unimaginable, insidious amount of facets studied, which is the bigger picture, which is the picture that you need to know about. Because if I take you down just a couple of studies, because they some of these studies can be 1,000 pages. You can do a whole show in just one study. And you'll learn lots. But you won't learn the horror, the true horror, until you do the ticker tape study. And the ticker tape studies, and what I used to do as a screensaver is I'll run these ticker tapes. I have around 60,000 or so. I have lots of studies, don't get me wrong, but just ticker tapes, I would run them on the screen, on the TV or on the computer when I'm just sitting there, if I'm doing something else. And whenever I glance, then I got these, and they're always in your subconscious. Like a lot of times when I'm playing guitar, these ticker tapes are flashing on the screen. And when I got people over visiting and they want to know about nuclear, that's one of the things I'll do. I'll throw that on the screen, and so when they'll look up at the screen, they'll read a few, and then they'll look away again. And by and by, you'll see them like they'll just start staring at it, and then they'll start asking you real questions. And they're like, "Well, nuclear is not actually very fun, is it?" or something like that. Applications of potassium chloride to Chernobyl contaminated lakes. This is the most batshit crazy. Every time we stop in these studies, like so, putting potassium chloride in a radioactive lake is not going to help it. Like it's so crazy, but they do that decontamination of fish, right? This is madness. It's the maddest. It's the most insane statement imaginable. Oh, yeah, just put some potassium chloride in your lake, and everything is like ookie dookie. Like it's hard to believe that somebody put out a study like that, but we got lots of them. I said, "Oh yeah, go ahead and eat the fish. We put potassium chloride in the lake, for goodness sakes. We're scientists. Who are you going to trust, Dana, or thousands and thousands and thousands of scientists who says it's okay?" Excuse me. I'm just a nuclear scumbag scientist. I gotta write up a song about these people. Once a nuclear scumbag, always a nuclear scumbag. You know how you can get tattoos, death before dishonor? I'm gonna get death before I become a nuclear scumbag. Reconstruction of thyroid doses after Chernobyl. They love. So they got you fixated on thyroid cancers, and then they'll come out and debunk it. Oh, well, everything was okay then, right? Yeah, everything was okay. Have a nice day, stupid. Mutations show no increases in the children of the Chernobyl liquidators. Aw. Well, Well, that's reassuring news. Thank goodness none of the children in Chernobyl looks like that which happened to be from Chernobyl. Like the abandoned children in Chernobyl. But no, Dana, there was no harm to the children of the people at the nuclear meltdown sites. They just harmed everybody else in the country. Do you really believe that? You really believe that these children just magically, there was an explosion of deformed and debilitating Down syndrome and autism. There was just this massive explosion for everybody else, but not for the people at ground zero. And the liquidators. Look up the word liquidator. It ain't a pretty word. That's an actual slur. It's an insult, right? These are victims. These are not liquidators. These were jacked off the street by the military in buses with machine guns. Get on the bus. There's like 600,000 of them. But hey, Dana, we got all these people doing the studies. See that, Dana? All these people are doing the study. And they all said everything's like a banana and a potato chip, and there was no adverse side effects. If you took these same people and you took them in your car, you took them for a drive, and you pulled up in front of one of these orphanages, they would cut your throat to get away from seeing the truth. Validation of the 139 iodine ecological transfer models and thyroid dose assessments using Chernobyl data followed data from the Plink district in Rushki. Accumulation potential dissolutions of Chernobyl-derived radionuclides in river bottom sediment. Radiation never goes away. You can't destroy it. The chemicals, you can't destroy it in incinerators. You can't destroy it. And it's here forever. It's a forever. And there's nothing on the planet that has a defense against it. Everything with replicating cells is severely impacted by it. How's everybody doing? La 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 la. You can call in to these live shows. I'm in Canada, so if you're in Canada, you got to put a 1 in front of it. 709-589-4406. 4406. We'd love to hear from the pro-nuclear community also. Feel free to call in. I'll go easy on you. Cesium. Oh, I never heard of cesium before. That's the first time all night I heard the word cesium. That's amazing. I was waiting for him to get to it. Accumulation by fish following acute input to lakes. Acute input. That's a new word for radioactive fallout. I don't know if I heard that one before. That's cool, man. A comparison of experimental and Chernobyl impact systems. Inflow of Chernobyl to the Black Sea. You got acute input into the lakes. You got inflows of the Chernobyl into the Black Sea from the Dnieper River. Oh, they got Ken the Abusler on that study. Little worm, 1992. He was only a young worm back then. He turned into a great big maggot ever since, didn't he? Detecting contamination-induced tree stress with Chernobyl exclusion zone. Detecting contaminated-induced tree stress. If you do what they discovered in Fukushima, you can do X-rays and see the radiation in the trees. It was the equivalent of congenital malformations and miscarriages. Lakefish as the main contributor of internal dose to lakeshore residences in the Chernobyl contaminated area. No, everything is a major contributor, not just the fish. Scumbags. Iodine deficiencies in soils and evaluation of its impact on thyroid gland diseases in areas subject to the contamination after the Chernobyl. What a disgusting industry this turns out to be. Chernobyl experiment experience on emergency data management. I mean, how do you hide it, see? This is what all these studies are about, to downplay it. Every one of these studies, I'm sure there's a couple there, but that are fairly honest, but it's pretty rare. And so what I'm trying to show you is this incredible thoughtfulness that goes into the cover story. The detail they put in for the cover story is extraordinary. And you have so many useful idiots, you'll see them listed up there in the blue, right? These are what we affectionately call useful idiots. They're there for that job to cover up, to write a study to cover up the damage. That's their job. They went to university to get the education, to get the job, to tell the lie, and back it up with a degree. See? Oh, I got a degree. I remember I was up in outside of Hewlett in Banfield. Banfield, a little community of like 100 people. But it's right out at the entrance to Osiris. Hewlett, which is a port full of islands. It's a big bay, right? And so out at the very mouth of it, which is it's a deep bay too, there is a university, a research institute, but it's a university where you have 71 universities contribute each year to that research institute, which is a university graduate program. And the students, they have all kinds of boats. They have an amazing place there. I'm barred from life from there, by the way. And they used to they used to have cameras out in front. They used to live stream it, and it was all the wonderful wildlife. After Fukushima, they got rid of the cameras. And I was up there. I went there. We done research right there 4 different times, and I stayed at a little hotel there in Banfield. And I used to go up to the university and try to do interviews and stuff like that. And so they got sick of me eventually. They just barred me from life. And I mean, these are scumbags. And so the first time I got there, I was talking to the director, the dean of the university. And I asked him about Fukushima. He said, well, there was no effect here whatsoever. And so I said to him, well, where's all the periwinkles? And the periwinkles are little snails, saltwater snails. And because I dove that area many years before that, and the rocks would be covered with millions and millions and millions and millions of periwinkles. And his reply was really interesting. He went, periwinkles? Periwinkles? Periwinkles, boy. Periwinkles, there's lots of periwinkles. And he started doing this, and I was like, keep the camera steady, Dana. This is brilliant. And he named this island. I said, well, that's not true. I was out there yesterday. There's no periwinkles there whatsoever. You're like, what? You were what? I said, well, actually, I'm a researcher. I've been here for 5 days researching the whole area. I was curious what your take on was, because there's no species out there. So what? You got 71 universities. What exactly are you studying? Because there's no species left after Fukushima. And he said, well, I got work to do. I can't talk right now. And that was the end of the 20-minute interview. But I posted it on my YouTube channel. And he attacked me. I got a strike on it. I got the strike removed. And about 2 weeks later, they reinstated the video. The video went viral right away that first day. And he panicked. They had 71 universities sending students and throwing money at this place. And there was no species left to study. Hard cases, man. But what was interesting about it is when you walk into that university, on the walls, and when you walk in the front door, there's this reception area. And there's 2 secretaries there. They got to know me quite well. And they used to laugh at me all the time because they liked me, right? They knew I was trouble, and they loved the reaction that I would get from the administration. Would just freak out when they seen me. And here I was still on crutches, right? I just gotten out of a wheelchair. Well, I had lost a wheelchair over the boat in a storm, right? And so now I was stuck with these crutches, these walking sticks, and they were very difficult because I wasn't used to them yet. And I used to drag my legs myself up short distances, right? Eventually, I got more strength over a few years. I'd been practicing for 10 years before that, right? Because I got injured in a diving accident. I was learning to walk again, right? That took about 10 years or something. And I still had to go another 3 or 4 years on sticks before I was able to get clear of the sticks. But during that period, I was doing research out of a wheelchair. I used to go on the beaches, but I couldn't get on the beaches. And so I would just go right up to the beach itself and document it at low tide. And because I had good lenses, you can photograph the entire beaches. But over the next number of years, I was actually on the beaches with the walking sticks. And eventually, the last couple of years, I was without the walking sticks. But I would always have a stick in my hand, right? Now I'm doing pretty darn good. I still can't. It's still absurd that I do all the work myself, mechanical work and all the physical work. Because I really am not healthy. I should never be doing that. It's unconscionable that the industry has cut off all funding to me and that I have to suffer and do everything myself. And I went out today because my other grinders, I can't get the 4-inch knotted wire brush off it because I broke the pin. And I was thinking about taking it apart and trying to fix it. I might do that tomorrow, who knows. But one of the shops quite a long ways away had them on sale for $30, $29. So I took off today to pick one up. When I got there, the last one just sold. Disappointing. And I really do need 2 grinders for the work I'm doing. But I'm going to start again tomorrow. And that's the way it gets done, right? I have to go out and work like a dog. And we raise a little tiny bit of money each week. And that keeps the whole operation moving forward. And we have enough supplies now to... I'm very thoughtful. I noticed last year to buy supplies. And hopefully I can never be put out of business, right? I can always do the research. Soybean thrives despite Chernobyl. Well, Chernobyl doesn't kill the plants per se. Yeah, soybeans are going to thrive, but that don't mean they're not incredibly radioactive, because they are. So to quantify, and this was New Scientist scumbags, of course, well, why are the soybeans thriving then if there's so much radiation? And so the average person has no answer for it. Right? Well, if the soybeans are right alongside a nuclear meltdown, they're still going to survive. They're just going to be lethal doses in increments over time from true bioaccumulation. So it's a very dishonest study to suggest that because soybean thrives despite Chernobyl, the way they're framing that narrative, these are, and you notice there's no name on it, these are very dishonest people. Plankton is an indicator of the temporal variations of the Chernobyl fallout. Well, the phytoplankton lives at the surface. It's the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestration chain. And so they get wiped out right away, which means the big whales that feed on them, the birds like the dove kites, the Cassini auklets, the storm petrels and stuff like that feed on these species, they're going to start showing up emaciated or not show up at all. They'll just disappear, right? Because they typically live out to sea unless they're at their colonies, right? And we have the biggest colony of storm petrels about 60 kilometers away from me, Baccaloo Island. And there's typically, for about 4.5 months a year, 3.3 million breeding pairs will come to that island. And the storm petrels are nocturnal. So I used to go out there like 1 o'clock in the morning or something and use searchlight till daylight to see if I can spot them coming and going. And I've never seen them a single time. Now they admit that they're not there, or that they've been severely, and they call it climate change, of course. But the reality of it is they're actually not there at all. You're not allowed on the island either, see? Medical monitoring results of survivors with acute radiation syndrome after Chernobyl. Acute radiation syndrome. like 600 helicopter pilots died. That was Harvard University clip I played for you earlier. But if you go to United Nations slash the club in the League of Nations, or you go to Wikipedia or something like that, they'll tell you 28 people died. They refuse to acknowledge, because they can't promote nuclear and acknowledge its harmful effects. Cancer incidences in Belarus after Chernobyl. New evidence of thyroid 15 years after Chernobyl. Interpretation of varying selectivities of cesium-137 potassium uptake by radishes. Again, right under field conditions near Chernobyl. Well, why are you growing food near Chernobyl, you sadistic monsters? And this voodoo of putting potassium in the field, and that's going to displace cesium-137, even if it was true, what about the other 1,000 isotopes that are going to be there wherever the cesium-137 is present? So it's a completely dishonest. Every time you see a study like that, those people should be arrested. Those people should be serving long time in jail, because the people that eat the radishes, because of their assertions, are going to end up getting sick and have debilitating illnesses or worse. Assessing the effects of radiation on abundance of mammals and predator prey and interaction using tracks in the snow. So what do you notice, and you know the thumbnail tonight is this mutated wolf. There's a story, and I'm not going to cover it tonight, but I've covered it when it came out multiple times in the last year, where he said Chernobyl wolves were doing great, and that they seem to have developed an immunity to radiation. This is simply crackery. And the wolves, wolves don't prey on insects, for instance. They're not preying on the rabbits there, because there is none. They're not preying. There's some there, but there's not very many to be found, right? They're not preying on small mammals, because they don't exist there. They're not preying. They're preying on migratory animals like moose and elk and stuff like that, like they've always done, as long as we know, right? They travel in packs, and they need to feed on a big animal to satisfy a big pack, right? And the animal's migratory route is ingrained into them. They're going to migrate through Chernobyl. They don't understand it's a nuclear wasteland. They see a nuclear exclusion zone sign. They don't know what that means. The animal's not like, hey, come over. What the fuck is that? I don't know. Let's eat some grass. We gotta get over there by the end of summer so we can start breeding again. Right? They're migratory, and so when their evidence, and this is their evidence, that there's large animals, right, in Chernobyl, and therefore there's an abundance of wildlife, it's just nonsense. Well, it's dishonest and deadly nonsense, lulling you into complacency. The Congenital Abnormality Registry in Belarus, a tool for the health impact of the Chernobyl accident, for the public health impact. Well, let's have a look at some of that. Oh, some of these pictures might be hard, but they're the facts, so look at them. Don't look away. These children are abandoned in Belarus and Ukraine and everywhere else. And there's a documentary out there called Chernobyl Hurts. And this is a foundation that raises money, hires doctors to go to Chernobyl and do operation on newborn young children before they to get open heart surgery to correct the heart damage, which will cause congenital malformations later, right? And I can't remember, they're doing 6,000 surgeries every year. It's an incredible story. If you watch the documentary Chernobyl Hurts, it's going to break your heart, but you're going to be a better person for it because you become much more articulated on the truth of it. They don't hide from the truth in that documentary. Short and long-term patterns of cesium-137 in fish and other aquatic organisms in small forest lakes in southern Finland since Chernobyl. So why are you studying? Why are they doing all these studies if Chernobyl was like a banana and a potato chip and walking in sunshine and all the other disgusting, despicable, dishonest misrepresentations that they used. Current situation and future planning of molecular, epidemiological, radiation health effects around Chernobyl and some plastic or wherever. 3D numerical model. I'm starting to stutter now, slur my words, because it happens with me when I start going through a lot of these studies. I'll switch gears in a second. Modeling of mud and radionuclide transport in the Chernobyl cooling pond. Well, if you got fuel in if you got a cooling pond, that means you got fuel in it, and the fuel is splitting atoms. So this is a perpetual radioactive fallout machine. So a fuel pool is a perpetual radioactive fallout machine. So every reactor has 2 fuel pools. Each fuel pool got decades of reactor cores, and each reactor core is still splitting the same amount of atoms they did for the boiled water for 1 million homes, but there's no containment. Vertical migration studies of cesium-137 from nuclear weapons fallout. And accident. Aerosol migration near Chernobyl, long-term data modeling. Transport of radioactive particles from Chernobyl. Well, it goes up into the jet streams. And even if it don't, it's so tiny. It's smaller than, when you look at, if you look at Asia, there's all kinds of studies out there on pollution from automobiles and factories and industries that crosses what they call the Trans-Pacific Corridor. And then that pollution is added every year to the indexes of pollution for many months because it stagnates along the coastlines when it hits North America. So, for instance, California, 30% of their air pollution is from Asia through the Trans-Pacific Corridor, the air corridor that brings it over. Now, these particles are huge particles. Each of these particles is 1,000 times bigger or more than the particle that's the atoms from Fukushima. So the Fukushima atom, in other words, doesn't need, or any other atom from nuclear sites, nuclear dumps or anything else, doesn't need a jet stream to disperse it wide and far. Right? It's so small, it assimilates itself into the air currents anyway. But the pollution indexes for North America from Asia, there's so many of these studies out there where they add, each year are added to the pollution indexes. Variation in transfer factors, radiocesium, and bankfuls. There's a lot of studies on these little small, they're like big mice or something in one way. I can't remember I'm not sure if they're a mouse or a rat family or whatever, but or a squirrel family. They're like to me, they look like a big hamster in many ways, I guess. In clear-cut, mature forest sites after Chernobyl. Prognosis estimation of the area is contaminated with alpha-emitting transuranium isotopes in Belarus following Chernobyl. So what about the betas? What about the neutrons? What about the gammas? What about the X-rays? And so when you have these elements, you can't just have alphas, you can't just have betas or anything else. You're going to have them all. And they all pulse energy almost at the speed of light. And some of them are they're all slightly less than the speed of light. But a couple, one is the quickest. He's closest to the speed of light. Next one's a little tiny bit slower, but he's almost, you can't tell the difference. It's almost the speed of light, right? And then the next one is a little bit slower, but it's a couple of 100 miles per hour slower than the speed of light. It's It's irrelevant, right? And so what they do is they'll say, well, there's a lot of this isotope, but it's a such and such emitter, and it's the slower one anyway, so it doesn't matter much. No, they're all almost pulsing energy at the speed of light. Now, when they hit each other at the speed of light, the thing about, and one of the reasons they all got their own name, gammas and alphas and neutrons and betas, is because they don't mingle with each other. And when they hit each other, the energy, and gammas will pulse 600 feet, say. When they hit each other, or the opposites, like alphas, neutrons, and betas, they don't mingle. They ricochet off each other. And that's known as a break-in effect. And we call it, the scientist lovingly calls it an X-ray. And so when it's in your forest, everything in the forest is getting a full body X-ray. So you're going to sterilize the ants, you're going to sterilize the bees. Not only the radiation is sucked up by the plants, and then the flowers is radioactive pollen. So all the pollinators, the moths and the bees and that, are bringing radioactive pollen back to the hives. So it's the quickest way to destroy the entire ecosystem is have nuclear power on your planet. Because there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. And so this alphas and betas, neutrons and gammas hitting each other, that effect is an X-ray. That's a nasty, powerful. So in the cities, everybody, in the communities and in your homes, everybody's getting full-body X-rays now due to 80 years of emissions because it never goes away. It's an invisible snowstorm where the snow never melts and never stops snowing because all the plants are hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools, and it never goes away. If that's not a nightmare scenario, what is? Really, what is? And people used to say, don't listen to Durnford. He's funded by the big oil, by the big gas, by the big coal companies. Dana's funded by like less than a handful of people. And I'm quite proud of that. I'll tell you the truth. That we've done what we've been able to do with so little, that we always made the right choices. You know, not everything worked out. Let's not doubt that for a second. I have made big boo-boos where we went to do research expeditions and everything broke and everything fell apart and everything died, and then we just ran out of money over and over and over trying to get stuff home, let alone fix it, and couldn't fix a lot of stuff. And what do I do, right? Do I just fixate on that one thing, or do I move on, right, and try to keep the operation moving forward? Like the outboard motor that I'm using on my boat has been to Alaska 6 times. This should have been changed every single year. I should have been putting a new outboard motor in the back of the boat. You know, you're out there 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean by yourself. It's not a game. You get in, you know, you moor off your big boat, and you get in your little boat, and you go 20 miles up the coastline. If you break down, how are you getting back? This is a dangerous game. If you get caught in a storm, how are you getting back? It's very dangerous, and I've did many times, and I always bring the supplies to sit it out. But it's no fun. It's the most worry imaginable because you're worried about your liveaboard washing up on the rocks while you're stuck somewhere for a couple of days. It's torture. It's literally the definition of torture. And you got no choice. You got to, if it's raining, it's freezing cold out, it's blowing a gale. At low tide, you got to get out there. You got to be out there before low tide. You got to get on your spot. You know, up there's 27,000 islands, but there's millions of rocks just under the surface, and nowhere near all of them are going to be on your GPSs, as we know, right? How many props have I ripped apart? Like it was 14 props or something up in the West Coast, like wrecked them. But I came away, you know, I survived the encounters. This is where I hit rocks that are not supposed to be there. They're not on the GPS. And you're on ground swells trying to get in, hide behind a bunch of islands to do some research. And typically, I would look for 100 islands on the chart, and I would set up shop there. And no matter which way the wind was blowing, I would hide in the middle of it somewhere. I had shelter, basically. But to go out and do the research, you had to go out into the open coastlines to do it properly. There was no middle grounds. And we provided GPSs of everywhere I was to. Take 20 pictures and a picture of your GPS. Take another 20 pictures, 30 pictures, picture of your GPS. And you document that whole shoreline. And you went back year after year to see if the species recovered. It was brutal. And the species didn't recover. It was an extinction event. And so when the unacknowledged alpha emitting particles, and look at all the people in the study, like we really should be ashamed of ourselves. We have no right not to be ashamed of ourselves. And like these props were, they're $340 each. And so, it's $4,000 worth of props. You can buy a lot of fuel for $4,000. I know in 1 month alone I burnt $7,000 worth of fuel running from storms to find safe areas where I can work for a couple of weeks and get chased out of it by another storm. And just doing, during the migratory season, you would do long hauls for days at a row. You do 5 days straight of going north and then 5 days, because you got 27,000 islands, so you would pick, try to triangulate. But you would look for pinch points where the birds would have to come in also, right? The birds can't get to the interior without going through pinch points on the outside coastline. Pinch points is, you get all these islands, the whole open coastline is all these islands, and all the inlets, they're what I call pinch points. That's where the ocean has to come through to get to the 27,000 islands. And if you're going to visit 27,000 islands, one a day, it takes you 71 years. And so I had to be pretty smart about it. But you had to repeat it for several years to quantify if the species came back or not. And so when we were up originally, there wasn't a single oasis left. Fukushima had wiped it out because it's exposed, low tides is exposed twice a day, right? It can't withstand it. And where does all the radioactive fallout that makes it to the coastline go? Into the tidal zones, right? So, we got all these mountains, tropical rainforests. A lot of rain gets washed down to the coastlines. And that's just the way it's always been, right? It's the same thing with the glaciers. They actually help cool down the coastlines during the summertime, not just the estuaries, the streams, and the rivers. And so when they got wiped out, and nobody would acknowledge that, after, like 7-8 years after Fukushima, the glaciers were gone from the Rocky Mountains. Because they're visible all year long, all summer long, all winter long. Well, all summer long, the glaciers never change, right? And now they're surviving on snowpack in the winter to cool down the rivers and the estuaries and the streams. Because in the summertime, the water, if we had a drought, then the glaciers would send more water down to the rivers and the streams and the estuaries, and the fish could get up and lay their eggs regardless. See? And it regulated the temperature. That was the most important role too, because those rivers, streams, and estuaries are regulated in the summertime by the cold water from the glaciers. And so is the coastlines. And so when you change that equation, the streams are too hot for the eggs to survive, for the small fries to proliferate. And what you end up with, of course, because you got all the other ones are mating, coming back and mating in those areas, now you have an ecosystem disaster. All the insects that they're dependent upon are gone. Right, all the frogs and all the whole ecosystem gets wiped out because you changed the temperature. So now you're starting to see over the last number of years the steelheads and the salmon that are laying their eggs in the estuaries at the mouth of the rivers. We've never seen that before, even heard tell of it before. And the bears are showing up emaciated. And they're trying to blame it on lack of salmon and blame it on poaching or fishermen. But the diet of the bears is mostly grub and roots and berries. They eat 200,000 berries a day. It's not, only 4% of their diet is fish. It's important, but there's many species of bear that don't live near the rivers and they don't eat salmon. They're healthy. The reason they're emaciated is because they have leukemia from the bioaccumulation of radiation from eating so many berries every day. It devastates their immune system too, right? And so the ticks and that now, when they don't have a defense against it anymore. Classification of hot particles from Chernobyl and the nuclear weapons detonation by non-destructive methods. Nuclear weapons detonations by non-destructive methods. The British, the nut jobs in the nuclear industry in Britain, what they done to Christmas Island was horrific. They still call the babies, they're jelly babies. They're still just deformed lumps of jelly. They destroyed all the tropical islands with nuclear bombs. The tropical paradises. Just the gift of the most important, one of the most precious gifts on this planet was the tropical islands. They were paradises. They're literally like going to another planet. They're just beautiful. And the nuclear industry went out there and destroyed them with everything they could. The British, what they done to, Maralinga and Montebello, for instance, they waited for the wind to blow across Australia. But they also done 700 nuclear weapons tests. It's more than 700. 700 nuclear dirty bombs, where they took plutonium and uranium-235 fission product in containers, fission product that would normally be in a nuclear weapon, wrapped it in conventional explosives, and detonated it. And then they had scientists that would go out and track down the plume and figure out how big of an area and how much was in the area. A lot of these scientists, of course, eventually died from this incredible radioactive poisoning. But back then, knowledge was, they were learning. There was a lot of incentive. If you were in the military, you couldn't say no. And you still can't go to Maralinga or Montebello Island off Australia coastline 70 years later. The French Polynesians, the Marshall Islands, rather, that was equal to a Nagasaki bomb a day for 12 years. Radioactive fallout. There's 1 million square kilometers in 2019 still declared uninhabitable because of radioactive fallout. But I can show you stories of the academic community claiming that it's a beautiful paradise. And just because the fish migrate through there and they live, don't mean they don't bioaccumulate the radiation, and don't mean that don't move up the food chain, and don't mean that ultimately don't sterilize those species and they stop reproducing altogether, because that's exactly what is going on. Right, and James Lucid left a comment there. It's rare to find a shell in the beaches. And I quite often forget to say that. But that's the biggest takeaway when you look at my pictures of the research expeditions, where beaches are made of shells, don't have shellfish or shells on them. And so the shellfish on a typical beach, every beach in British Columbia, first is the most prolific one, is the mussel shells. Then the next ones are clams, like large clams, razor necks, and then the manillas and the little necks. And there's many other species of clams. There's the scallop clams, and there's several different types of scallops. All of these are going to be on the beaches. There's going to be oyster shells, and there's many different types of oyster species, and they're going to be all over the beaches. There's going to be the abalone shells. They're going to be all over the beaches. They're like a one-sided shell. But they're very, they're pearl, right? All of these are calcium, by the way. And there's geoducks, incredible large shells again. These geoducks, they live up to 150 years. And so there's and these shells are filters, by the way. And then there's the cockles, and there's an incredible amount of just shells. There's the snails. There's those little triangle shells. I can't remember the name on the top of my head. There's all kinds of snails and periwinkles. There's all kinds of other, like those circle shells. There's so many of them. There's the long pointy snail shells. And when you go into the beaches, you're not going to see any shells. But the beaches themselves are made from the sand of the shells that have broken down. But they're gone. And that defies the conventional wisdom of what radiation effects are. Because that's the radiation effect that done that. And it's the spookiest thing you'll ever see. And there's no habitat there for species, because a lot of species will live in these older shells at low tide. The shells will retain water, and there's a lot of little tiny... And even the little pools of water was really rare to find any species. And, there was... In the tidal zones, there was also 700 algae. And in the 700 algae, the kelps, there was around 5,500 highly visible... Not highly visible, but visible... well-known documented species of invertebrates without the backbones that lived in the 700 algae in that web of all the leaves, right? And they were documented. They're gone. There was 480 species of worms. A lot of the species lived in the tidal zones too, and they created their own shell casings, and that's where they lived, in those shell casings. And in those, there was 80 species of sponges, and each sponge come in multiple vibrant colors. Those species were exterminated. Just give me a second here. There we go. Let me show you some of these species, because you'll never see them again if you don't see them here. Now remember, I used to be a commercial diver. I worked that whole area. And that's from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska for 6 years. And these marks are just meant to highlight the research expeditions where I spent 4 to 5 months a year on the ocean doing the research, right? And it's hard to comprehend how much effort I put into looking for the species. It really is. I don't think the average person appreciates the danger, the absolute danger that we're in from nuclear meltdowns. Radiation covers the entire planet. And what I discovered, this is pretty straightforward, is that the species to your left are exterminated. And there were 7,000 plus species, highly visible species. It was just massive species. You couldn't go ashore low tide because you'd break your neck trying to get up to put a beach line on the trees. And this was due to the radioactive fallout. The models to your left are 20 days of radioactive fallout. And these species are exposed twice a day, right? So when we go up there after, all the species are, except for a couple, and we documented the ones, but they're very weak, very lethargic looking. The species to your left are exterminated due to endless radioactive fallout and a pulse event from Fukushima. And there's, I'm very familiar with all the species because I used to work in that environment every day. I lived there and live, breathe, eat that stuff every single day. That was paradise. It was an actual paradise. It was beautiful. And you look forward to it every single day. You never got tired of working in that environment. There was no way. You were always, and even if you didn't want to be, you were blown away by the species to the left. It was an absolute pleasure. It was an absolute thrill to be in that ecosystem. I used to do trips of 100 days at a time. It was an absolute privilege to know those species. Something I treasure. It's hard to comprehend. And the reason I exist today is because of that background. Because I considered them my friends. And I knew that I was the only person who would ever see them, ever. Nobody would ever see those pictures. When I dove on a spot, I'm going to be the only person who ever dove there. Nobody will ever dive there again. There's no one up there like this. You can only dive in a fraction of the ocean on top of that. And I would always go into the most open, exposed part of the coastlines because that was where the most oxygen was. So when I was doing a food harvesting, but radiation is soulless and heartless. It exterminates everything, right? So Japan, they hid the 4 reactors that melted down, and then they said Chernobyl was the world's worst accident. Chernobyl is a brutal, horrific accident, and nobody's denying that. And so that's what tonight is about, Chernobyl. But I'm just showing you my experiences with the research of how bad Fukushima was. And then when you look at these studies of how bad Chernobyl is, the majority of these studies are meant to just downplay the incredible adverse effects. Retrospective dose estimates in Estonian Chernobyl cleanup workers by means of fish. The Estonian Chernobyl cleanup workers were jacked off the street by the military with guns and brought there to work. Nobody volunteered. Remediation strategies, there was no nuclear scientist there. Remediation strategies for rural territories. They weren't jacking scientists in front of the college. They were jacking the fabric of their country off the streets to bring there and get sick and die later. Thrown away like paper towels. Remediation strategies for rural territories. Well, the whole, like, you know, I don't know how many studies I showed tonight, but it's a ridiculous amount. And I'm just going to keep clicking away here for a little bit. In fact, I'm just going to put this on the auto timer. So every 5 seconds, I'm going to put that on the big screen. Every 5 seconds, we should get another one on the screen. Because that's the only way we're going to get through this. Oh, I got to hit play too, I suppose. That wouldn't hurt, does it? My system's still a little slow, which is unusual. Because I have an exceptional system. That worked. Hang on, let's try that again. That's the way it goes sometimes. Okay, now it's working. Kinetics of fuel particles in the soil in natural condition. In urine, estimation internal doses of adults. So if you're not going to look for cesium, then you're a degenerate sack of shit, right? Southern parts of Sweden. Legal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Legal abortions. Genetic consequences of radioactive contamination. And let me go back to that one for 1 second. Incidences of legal abortion. And because you know these congenital malformations are going to show up, right? Damn system, man. Done it again. Hang on. Right, this is why there's legal abortions, right? And many, you'll see that in countries because they know these debilitating illnesses are right around the corner. And thank goodness that there's foundations out there that goes down there and gives these children something they've never known before, love. Something they've never felt before, which is love. And it takes a special soul to admit the truth, and none of them are going to be nuclear scientists or nuclear academics. Their job is to destroy everything's future, the genetics of all species. The invisible thief, Chernobyl. See, that's one of the few, and that's the Lancet Oncology. Mutation rates of post-Chernobyl families from Ukraine. Yeah, Grandpa died. Auntie died. My nephews died. Sources of present Chernobyl-derived cesium. Contamination formation Ukraine caused by Chernobyl, you guessed it. Global fallout from Chernobyl in soil from Poland. Eyes wide shut, new scientists. They're such scumbags, new scientists. Radiation hazards caused by the Chernobyl accident. The history of Chernobyl contamination of the floodplain soils. Reindeer husbandry, the Swiss market for reindeer meat. In fact, they weren't allowed to sell, the Latvia wasn't allowed to sell the reindeer. They're still not allowed to sell it today, right, because of Chernobyl. And you're talking about people who've been doing it for several thousand years. Right, their reindeer herds. Rogue cells and cancer in Chernobyl cleanup. Of course there is. You got pounded by massive doses. Unbelievable. Went on the roof for 25 seconds and got hideous doses. Some comments on the presence of Chernobyl-derived cesium technetium in the stratosphere. So they've studied. It's so difficult, I think, for the average person to really... There's no way the average person is going to say, well, I'm going to go and look up a whole bunch of studies on Chernobyl, and I'm going to spend hours and hours and hours and hours, and I'm going to just look at all these studies. Because you get caught up in one study, or you get caught up in two studies, and it might take you 2 weeks to read the whole study. It might be 1,000 pages. And it's all meant to lead you down the hole, the rabbit hole. And so the ticker tape studies, which is what you're doing tonight, you get this incredible, unbelievable insight that, wait a second, they're studying every facet of the ecosystem, the biosphere, every country. There's no exception. They're studying everything, and there's an endless amount of money. And it's year after year after year after year these studies are showing up. What's going on? Why are they doing that? Radiation protection measures for special references. Accident zones. 5 years after, 30 years after Chernobyl, 5 after Fukushima. What have we learned, and what do we still need to know? Well, what you need to know, everything I showed you so far tonight, that's for sure. Modeling the dynamites of fish contaminated by Chernobyl. There was no fish jumping on my research expeditions. There was no birds feeding on fish. There was no birds in the anchorages every night. I'm out there 4 to 5 months at a time. And the average we counted was around 3,000 birds a year. Most of them were seagulls close to big communities, which meant they had other sources like fish plants and that. And I was thinking about my study last year. And we done it last year's study, and this is kind of important, so let's talk about that for a second. And let's put that in autoplay where we're talking. Because there's no way I'm going to get through everything tonight. You know me, I got a habit of overdoing it. Dirty bugger. I'll figure it out. I might not. So last year we done a study on the species we got left here on the coastline, which is seagulls, the kittiwakes, we call tickleass down here, but their actual real name is kittiwake. and cormorants, which don't belong here, are not supposed to be here, and are deep divers. So the kittiwake, which is like a baby seagull, but it's not, and the seagulls are, the sewer birds of the planet. These are surface feeders and tidal zone opportunists, right? Now, normally they would go into the healthy tidal zone. They can eat whatever they want. And for most of the year, you're going to find them in McDonald's or fast food joints or places that people populate looking for handouts. At low tide, they're going to be in those same spots because there's nothing in the tidal zone for them to eat. And so a couple of days ago, it struck me, like when we done a study last year, we done 18 trips on the ocean to the islands where the birds are raising their fledglings and their hatchlings. And we only seen about a 4% survival rate. A total failure also at the end of the season, we noticed, of the puffins. They laid double eggs, and so did the kittiwakes. They had no survival whatsoever. And so about halfway through it, I found where the seagulls, because they weren't feeding in the ocean, they weren't feeding in the tidal zones, but they were at their nesting colonies, and we were going out looking for the eggs, looking for the hatchlings, 18 trips, right? And I would go out for about 7 hours a day and just meander at very low speeds around these islands. But I was also looking for whales, and so you can't go very fast. You're looking for species, so you're always just traveling really slow. And so last year, about halfway through the season, the breeding colonies, which should be 46 million birds instead of 2,000, because they didn't show up, by the way, again. This is the biggest migratory path on the entire planet. And it struck me a couple of days ago that those birds, because I noticed last year, were feeding, when I finally found them, they were at the fish plant, quite a ways away from me. And when I went up the coastline in good weather, here were all the seagulls, and I went, holy shit, this is where they're feeding the young ones from. So the colonies would fail if the fish plant didn't open up. Now, last year, there was a strike here on the East Coast. The only real industry they got there is the crab fishery. As everybody knows, the crab in Alaska just failed. 10 billion crabs disappeared. Obviously, a lot more than that, but the official story is 10 billion crabs just got up and disappeared. They're like, maybe they went somewhere else. Well, it doesn't work that way. It is migratory. They go where they have for millions of generations. It's the nature of the beast, right? Snow falls out of the sky. It doesn't fall up, right? Snow falls down. And fish and animals and everything migrate, and there's a given, whales and everything else, birds, they migrate. There's a pattern, and there's nothing they can do about it. They can't say, like, fuck it, I want to go this way this year, right? It doesn't work that way. And so last year, the season, there was a strike for 6 weeks before the season started up, which was late into the breeding colony. So they didn't have any food. So I'm wondering this year, because the season opened basically on schedule, which is a week ago, and will run for about till August, which is enough to raise the fledglings and the hatchlings, right? So I'm wondering this year, will we get a bigger percentage of survival in those colonies? Now, the only colony that done good was the cormorants, which don't belong here. And I think we've seen maybe 30 ducks last year. And I've seen probably 50 puffins. And now we know in September we found out the puffin colony failed completely. It's a complete failure. And in fact, they had laid an extra set of eggs to try to recuperate it, and they failed. But I'm just talking that we know that in 2015, 2016, there was over 1 million common murres and 1 million Cassini auklets that died from British Columbia to Alaska. They were emaciated. What's interesting about that is that they're from two different spectrums of the food chain. So the common murre will dive 600 feet all day long, and they'll feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and small herring, capelin, and sand lance and small mackerels and stuff like that. 6, 7, 8, 9 inch fish, right? But the Cassini auklets are eating the microscopic and small animals, very small stuff. So that's two spectrums of the food chain that encompasses the whole food chain. And they were showing up in the hundreds and thousands and over 1 million ultimately. And some of them were showing up way inland in fresh water, like the common murres, which don't exist there, right? And so if you go back and look at the pictures again of the tidal zones, normally if they can't find their migratory prey, because that's what they do, they'll travel with the migratory prey, herring or squid or whatever, or krill, of course, which is like a big shrimp that can live up to 10 years. And so once you get to the 10 years, the krill, you expect to see the krill go almost to nothing, because the survivors would have been bioaccumulating it, but they would have survived, see? But they wouldn't have reproduced. And so you won't see that reproduction. You'll see them live out their life or close to it, and then they'll stop. They'll almost disappear. That's what we've seen, right, in all the species. And then all the whales, like particularly the filter feeders, and particularly like the gray whales, the humpback whales, which are dependent upon the phytoplankton, the zooplankton feeding their species. And so what you had over the last number of years here, you had 10,000 gray whales. And the majority of these are emaciated. They're too weak to get out of the way, so a lot of them were hit with ships. But since 1978, the total number of deaths, or no, strikes rather, not necessarily deaths, but strikes with ships was around 1,200. So currently the media knows you don't know that, are trying to blame the majority of the die-offs on ship strikes, right? Or even worse, windmills, the most stupidest thing imaginable. The idea is to promote nuclear, because nuclear is dying. And nuclear is such a terrible thing. And so then you also had 10,000 dead, since 2016, 10,000 dead gray whales, which are filter feeders, which meant, and they died emaciated, we covered it. And horrific stories, by the way, too. There was 1,000 covert beak whales over in the United Kingdom, deep water whales that don't belong on the coastlines, showed up in different stages of decomposition, which is, you consider 10%. They found 1,000, which meant that at least 10,000 covert or beak whales had died in just a couple of year period. And the stories we covered back then were clearly talking about emaciation. It's the same thing with the pilot whales, and I've done a couple of shows back on the die-offs. I showed those headlines from 2014, 2015, 2016. When the pilot whales were coming up on the beaches in groups, it wasn't because one was sick and the rest followed them up. It was because they were emaciated. And when there was different groups of them along a coastline, they all had those same attributes. They were emaciated. There was, now they say there's 7,000 humpback whales missing from the migratory route. And they assume they died of starvation and / they were emaciated. And so they'll say thin, or they'll say, what's another word, malnourished or something like that. But they're emaciated. And it's severe emaciation. And then we've seen mass die-offs of sperm whales, which are dependent upon octopus, showing up. We've never seen it before in history again. And of course, the octopus is a keystone, or the squid is a keystone species. It feeds many species. But we were seeing abnormalities, die-offs of the killer whales showing up emaciated. The killer whales can eat 300, not can, but do. They have a big diet, like 360 species or something. They eat whatever they want, and they just eat whatever they want. We see these same attributes with all the other species of whales, right? The fin whales which are a pretty skinny looking animal anyway, show up even way worse, like a stick. Beautiful, and these such precious, and we're going to let a single industry do this to us? Like when you look at all these studies, I know it's crazy, right? You're looking at all these studies, and it's hard to wrap your mind around it, because I'm not going to try to articulate every single study. It'll take me 10, 15, 20 hours to get through what I got put there, because I'm stupid. I always overdo it, right? When you start looking at the bigger picture, and that's what you've seen, if you watch the video all the way up to now, then you know the big picture. You got no illusions. There's nobody going to fucking trick you. There's no one going to persuade you different. You have been thoroughly convinced at this stage, right? That nuclear got nothing but bad attributes. Nuclear is a disaster. Its very existence is a threat to all species. And this information, despite the fact that it's meant to downplay it can't do that without acknowledging it. That there is something there, and you can go out and downplay every one of these studies, but the industry won't. But you can go out and convince yourself that every one of these studies is wrong, and that I'm wrong. Then that means you're a very dishonest person, and you've probably been affected by Chernobyl or Fukushima. And when you look at the research expeditions that I've done, that even the 30,000 insects on the high tide line are gone, that the forests are silent. That's the craziest thing imaginable too, by the way. This beautiful tropical rainforest that had a diversity that it's incomparable to anything. It was a true tropical paradise. And if a million people shipwrecked on the coast, they had tons of food, and they could never harm the diversity. They could never harm the species. Because no matter what you took out of the tidal zones, the deeper water filled up that zone again immediately with fresh species. There was prime real estate, the tidal zones. When you look at the bigger picture, when you're honest, even a little bit honest, radiation is nobody's friend. It's the biggest threat to humanity and the 8 million species. It's an industry of crooks and monsters and sadistic demons. These are thieves. They stole everybody's future, all the species' future. They're good for nothings, right? They're Malthusians. They're felons. They're convicts. The people that are doing the studies to downplay it are unspeakable. They're heinous. They're monstrous. They're loathsome. They're sordid. They're wicked. I don't know. Call it whatever you want. Immoral, nefarious. It's indefensible. It's inexcusable. It's unforgivable. It's intolerable, and it's embarrassing that the academic community would sell us out that easy. That these are... It's humiliating. It's downgrading, degrading. It's diabolical, and it's egregious. No matter, they're stealing everybody and everything's future. This is fraudulent, swindling. Call it whatever you like. They're not gangsters. They're monsters. They're not bandits. They're sadistic demons. They're compromising the future of humanity and the 8 million species in a way that the average person has no way of perceiving. And they're cowards. They really are. They really are like, they're serial killers, right? They kill all species. They hate everything. And the idea is that you'll never see the big picture. Unless you find me, then you're seeing the bigger picture, believe you me. You're going to see the bigger picture. But they know that, and they make sure that barely nobody can find me. The ones that find me are quickly isolated by their IPs. But, see, if enough of us started speaking out, they can't control that. They can't contain that anymore. And so they're desperate to contain me. But at the same time, they use me as a guinea pig. They use you as a guinea pig. And they get confidence that nobody... Because like they expected this to happen, and it only happened in such a small way. It's just great. It's disgraceful, no? It's detestable. It's reprehensible. It's despicable. And it's terrible. What is loathsome how... Where am I to? It's loathsome how this industry was able to hoodwink everybody into giving up. You know, my biggest fear basically is we'll find a planet with 8 million species and a civilization on it, just like Earth. And this industry will immediately put a nuclear reactor on it and start the clock to the countdown to the extinction of that wonderful new ecosystem. Because that's exactly what this industry will do. It won't even hesitate. They'll be literally bribing every politician on the planet to bring it to fruition. I haven't seen a single redeeming quality in any of these studies, have you? And all I'm trying to do tonight is make sure that those who find me and those who watch the video come away with a clear understanding. There's no debating. There's no need. You can't come here and beat Dane up in a debate. You can't take my video and dissect it and say he's wrong. And nuclear's like a banana. See, I told you, folks. It's like walking in the sunshine. You can't do it. You're stuck with the horror, the absolute horror, that this industry is out to get you and the 8 million species, and it's time to gut up. You got nothing to lose, or nothing, but this is all you got left is to come out and hold them accountable. You got to hold them accountable. And that's the only way that we have the hope of a future. And the future that we're going to end up with, if we don't hold them accountable, is not a future. It's going to be a bunch of inbreed morons from the industry. And there'll be nothing there for them to rule over. There'll be no insects. There'll be no bacteria. There'll be no fungus. There'll be nothing. And this planet deserves much better than what these people are going to do. We deserve, our children, our friends, our families, our loved ones, the 8 million species deserve a voice, right? They deserve 1 million voices. This industry couldn't survive if you had 1,000 people coming out doing what I'm doing. This industry couldn't survive. It's falling apart now, and I'm really the only person out there curb stomping it. There's no one out there doing an educational program in history, which just absolutely petrifies me. And my job would be so much easier if there was more people doing it to take the heat off me, because they got no one to pick on, only me, and they got the shit kicked out of me. They got the daylights beat out of me now. There's nothing I can do to them. All I can do is come out and do these presentations as much as I can, and in the hopes that the policymakers and the investors, because they're going to find me, despite the industry trying to stop it, they're going to find me, and they're going to watch the video and they're going to go, well, it's not like a banana. Holy shit. Woohoo! It ain't like no banana. Ain't like no potato chip. Because that's what they're told, see? And they're going to go looking for another opinion. And they're going to find all the apologists like Ernie Gunnarsson and Helen Caldicott and Christopher Busby. And then eventually someone's going to say, well, I don't know if I should tell you, but you should watch Durnford. Who's Durnford? Oh, you'll find him here. He's there. Watch one of his videos. There's a different narrative out there you probably want to be aware of before you invest the pensions money into this industry. Predicting the cost and consequences of a large nuclear accident in the United Kingdom. That's 2017. It destroys all your water, all your communities, all your farms. And like, I'm not bragging about Dana. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to motivate this planet to fight back. The earthworm population in soil is contaminated by the Chernobyl atomic power station. In Fukushima, the excrement from the worms is at 1.4 million atoms per kilogram. This is crazy. We're talking far away from the nuclear plant. You can't grow anything in this soil. Cesium-134, 137 honeybees in the cheese samples collected in the U.S. after Chernobyl. Well, you're talking about radioactive pollen. That's why it's still in the honey is radioactive pollen. So the best way to destroy the pollinators is radioactive fallout, isn't it? Plutonium, americium isotopes in the atmosphere of Lithuania, a comparison of different source terms. Because they also conflated, this was because of Fukushima, they conflated Chernobyl with the numbers, right? But Chernobyl, the signal would have got drowned out by the Fukushima signal. Because the Fukushima signal, for instance, was 220 million atoms of iodine-129 per liter, sustained for months and months and months. A fallout. These are numbers we've never even dreamt of. I shouldn't say dreamt of, have nightmares about. It was 450,000 times detection levels. So 3 or 4 million atoms of the xenon-133. There was studies of the sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs. These are super hot particles caused by heating water at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures from the melted reactor cores. Childhood leukemia following Chernobyl, the European Childhood Leukemia Incident Study. And every time I see a bunch of names, I'm looking for certain names, because there's a few notorious scumbags out there. But all of it's meant to downplay it. So all of these people threw the children under the bus. Distribution sources of iodines, plutonium, cesium. 2016, and they threw in, of course, Chernobyl in that equation. Experiments on bacteria, plants, fungi, tissues, and animal cultures. Let me get back to the early 1987s. There we go. Measurements of 129 iodine concentrations in the environment after the Chernobyl reactor accident. Acute and long-term effects of radiation on the pine stands post-Chernobyl. 137 cesium determination and mutagenicity test in wild. I can't remember, these mice or something. When you talk about residue, that's meant to downplay it. When you hear the word residue, it's nuclear fallout. And the reason, because when you call it residual, you're taken away from the fact that anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So using the word residues is a completely dishonest way and inappropriate way, right, to articulate it. It's not meant to, right? It's meant to downplay it. This is not... Anything that's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison is not a residual. It's a dangerous dose, right? No matter how minute it is on the atomic scale, it's a dangerous dose. And because it pulses energy almost at the speed of light, it's an incredible dose to everything with replicating cells. Models of radionuclide wash-off in contaminated watersheds using Chernobyl's data in 1999. It all washes down into your fresh water. So like a lot of water aquifers are surrounded by mountains, right? That's why the aquifer exists there. It's because you have all this runoff of the mountains all the time, because the higher it is, the more moisture, the more water is washing down. And eventually, with the higher ranges in that, you got constant flows coming out of the the air. You don't have to wait for rain all the time, in other words. And that washes the radionuclides down to a central basin, which is typically going to be underground. It's going to be a massive aquifer, much larger than the surface. And then that's going to be contaminated. And those aquifers are the source of life, right? We can't have life without water. Water is our most important asset, and we should worship water. Water is so precious, so important. We take it for granted, and that's a fatal mistake for for the humans, or the all species. Environmental radioactivity studies Austrian and Bavarian forest ecosystems. Long-term behaviors of contamination, soil, vegetation, wild boar, radiological coherences. A problem with the ecosystem, the forest, is the radiation destroys the fungus and the bacteria, and you can't have healthy trees or plants without fungus or bacteria. And the fungus and bacteria feeds the whole ecosystem and coordinates the whole ecosystem. It's unbelievable. It's one of the most important facets of the forest. And so when radiation wipes out the stuff, then the forest doesn't break down the foliage and the litter anymore, because there's no biota left. Once you kill the bases of the ecosystem, you're going to kill the biota too. Now, because the forest doesn't break down, you have all this tinder dry because it's not absorbing water no more. The water runs off it because it doesn't have the biota to suck up the water and retain it. So when you get lightning strikes, you're going to have massive sustained forest fires that move at a quick rate because you're lifting up huge foliage and litter that didn't break down and travel thousands of feet. But you also have, when you have rain, the rain doesn't soak up, so now you have flash floods. And so after a severe pulse event that covers the planet in radioactive fallout, if it's really severe, you would expect to see post-accident over the next decade or so, huge forest fires and massive floods. But you would also expect to see supercell storms, like supercell cyclones, supercell typhoons, supercell hurricanes, and random storms just out of the blue. And this is caused by the heating, because you don't have a cooling effect. The earth doesn't perspire anymore because you wipe out the bacteria and the fungus. And so you don't have this cool air, the morning dew and stuff, right? And so now the heat, when you get a storm coming through, it's got all this heat all of a sudden that is not part of the million-year ecosystem. And there's so many isotopes with such longevity and such a harmful effect. And because gamma, when you cover a forest in millimeters of, say, cesium, stuff like that, and all the other isotopes, you're talking about perpetual pulsing of energy at 600 feet for just the cesium-137. So it's going to pulse through your neighbor's house, the neighbor's house, and then your house, and still hurt you for the rest of your life, every day, every second. But when it's in the forest, you got all this together. It's all pulsing. The gamma alphas, neutrons, and betas don't mix. They hit each other, and they ricochet almost at the speed of light. Both of them almost at the speed of light. The whole story is insane. And then that X-ray effect is another massive effect. So you got gamma shines, neutron bombardments, the beta rays, the gammas, and you got the X-rays. It's an elixir of misery, right? I can show you all the studies, whatever you need to convince you that this is bad. I can find for you. Let me know. I'll get it and put it together and do a show for you if you're not convinced. And if you watch this whole show, made it all the way up to here, and you're still not convinced nuclear is bad, what are you doing on my site, scumbag? Because only a scumbag would get this far through the video and say, well, I don't think it's very bad. The influence of post-Chernobyl fallout and birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Thyroid cancers, 50 years. What a great... These people... really know how to live it up, eh? The transport of Chernobyl will derive radiocesium through 2 freshwater lakes in Columbia. You know where you drink your drinking water. What could possibly go wrong? So how the hell did we ever get to this? Well, they own the professors, they own the universities, they own the medias, they own the key government positions, and eventually everybody else assimilates into it, right? And if all they produce, if all the professors are scumbags, guess what the students are? Imagine how many scumbags Professor Geraldine Thomas, Imperial College produced, or Robert Gale, or Kathleen Higley, or imagine, these people are producing misery machines. That's what these nuclear students is, a misery machine. When they graduate, they get to go out and practice. Everybody becomes now a guinea pig to them. They're so well indoctrinated, otherwise they won't get the job, see? And so if you look at humans as an opportunity for experiments, you got a job with the nuclear industry. They're going to find you and come and knocking with a big checkbook, and you're going to say yes. Cesium-137, strontium-90 contamination, water bodies in the area affected by the releases from Chernobyl nuclear plant. But you got to include the biggest byproduct, which is curium isotopes, into that, right? Reply to response regarding abundance of birds in Fukushima is judged from Chernobyl. Abundance of birds. Yeah, migratory birds. And mutated birds. But see, most of them are going to be seed eaters because the insects are gone, right? DNA damage repair in bladder after. Your DNA doesn't. Like, it repairs naturally from normal anthropogenic exposures, right? Not anthropogenic, but normal stardust exposures, normal emitters. But it doesn't know how to repair. It can't, like, if you got radiation in your body, it's pulsing energy at the speed of light in every direction, like an explosion. A second later, it's an explosion almost at the speed of light. And so that's wrecking your chromosomes and your DNA far, far away. Like gamma can pulse 600 feet. Right? So that's going to wreck your organs, everything, every second. And now your body got to repair all that damage every second. It can't do it from a single isotope in your body. So imagine the bioaccumulation in your body, pulsing energy, you got 1 million atoms of anthropogenic stuff in your body because of food from the nuclear wastelands. As I showed you, like Chernobyl didn't stop growing food there. They put potassium there and said, hey, have a nice day, everything's great. I'm a scientist, trust me. And this was humanity's. It's the biggest breach of academics in history is the nuclear industry, right? Disposition of gamma emitters from Chernobyl and their transfer in lichen and soil columns. It's brought back to the surface each year by the plants, right? Dealing with Chernobyl genetic legacy. How are you going to deal with it? You can't deal with something like that. Separation of technetium-99 in soil and plant samples collected around Chernobyl. Development of hot particles. Investigation of hot particles from Chernobyl. Suicides in the region affected by Chernobyl. Yeah, because you just drove them off their properties. You told them there'd be somebody there when you got off the bus and they would take care of you. There was no one there. The industry is so self-centered. Is one of the other things you notice about this industry. It really stands out when you look at it from a wide spectrum. These people the industry is so self-centered. They're just thinking about protecting the industry. They don't give a shit about the victim. Unless they want to study them, of course. I mean, this is why they built Nagasaki and Hiroshima back on a bomb crater. Why would you do that for? What kind of batshit lunatic thought that was a great idea? Oh, well, let's bury the victims back in the nuclear wasteland. Let's go back to the nuclear wasteland and pretend everything is okay. Let's do a bunch of studies and mark it down to and blame it on their tobacco and their cigarettes and everything else. We're almost through. We still got another 10 minutes to go, maybe, or something like that, 15. Might as well keep going. No need stopping now. We got to edit this for, didn't we? It's been a busy week. It's been a hectic week, actually. We made it through the week. And the last show of the week, might as well put out a doozy, the 25th anniversary, or 38th anniversary of Chernobyl. Radioactive contamination, rainwater after Chernobyl. The vertical distributions of Chernobyl-derived radionuclides in the Baltic Sea sediments. A long-term field study on the effects of acid radiation, irrigation, and compensatory limit. I'm starting to slur my speech so much. I'm losing it. Can we make it to the rest of these? I haven't got that many left. Analysts of DNA strand break induction and repair implants from the vicinity of Chernobyl. They don't repair themselves. You can't repair because you're pulsing energy every second. It's not like you took a pair of scissors and you went out and you cut a plant, right? It's not like when you get radiation in your body, it's not like a cut on your hand. So when you cut your little, take a little paper, no, don't do it, but if you take a piece of paper and you cut your finger, I'm only saying that because I know there's nuclear scientists out there like, don't do it, man. I know how stupid you guys are. And I know the people that come here regularly are not going to do it, but I'm worried about nuclear scientists. So if you cut your paper cut, your body's going to heal that in a few days with white blood cells. And then your white blood cell count is going to go back down. Your red blood cell count is going to come back up. So if you got radiation in your body or a plant or something like that, it's pulsing energy every second. The plant has to try to repair all of that. It's not like you cut the plant and the plant is going to repair itself, right? It's so important. The biggest hazard at Chernobyl is nuclear scientists making studies to downplay it, right? And so people go there on vacation thinking that the scientist says it's okay. Which is, famous last words, right? The scientists said it was okay. Nuclear scientists said everything is safe. Famous last words. Analysts of DNA strand break induction and repair implants from the vicinity of Chernobyl. You know what? For the last part, let's bring in some artificial intelligent pictures of Fukushima. So we got some comparison. Just bear with me. My God, I got so much material. So in Chernobyl, it should have picked up 300 billion one-ton bags of radiation, basically. Determination of radioactivity concentrations in soil samples and dose assessments in Turkey. It irradiated everything around the planet. It covered the entire planet. Chernobyl plant under threat of closure in the year 2000. They've studied so many things that your brain can't operate after a certain while because you can't keep up with it. The guidance on how to best respond to a big nuclear accident: don't let any nuclear scientists or nuclear experts into the equation. Don't put them in charge. Don't give them prominence under any circumstances, right? If you have a nuclear accident, the worst thing can happen to you is a nuclear scientist is interviewed. They're going to cut your throat, and they're going to go home with a big fat paycheck and laugh about it too. I think they should all have to wear like a bright yellow suit or a white suit with big antennas so you can spot them from far away. That way you can cross the street when you see them. And so people know not to get... Using a bank of predatory fish samples in areas affected by Chernobyl. Decision-making framework for application of force countermeasures in the long term after Chernobyl. Validation of environmental transfer models, assessment of effectiveness of countermeasures. There is no countermeasures. Disposition, distribution of Chernobyl followed fission products in the Russian soil. And the problem with, if you do what I'm doing, the only problem you're going to face is nuclear industry is they're going to attack you. They are going to attack you from 1,000 different ways. You're not going to have a reputation ever again. They're going to use every vile trick in the book to get people to not listen to you or watch you or support you. They're going to make up relentless lies, and your life is going to be destroyed. But when it's all said and done, you won't regret fighting against the nuclear industry. And they're going to have psychiatrists study your videos. They're going to have public relation firms target you in your communities. It's an industry of misery, and it can only exist in the dark. It can't exist in the light. And so I knew a long time ago, when I remember in 2011, late 2011, and everybody was begging for somebody to do something. All the comments, I used to read the comments, and why don't somebody do something? Why does somebody stop these monsters? And the obvious answer was because you're going to get targeted, and it's going to be vicious, and it's going to destroy your life. They will destroy your life, and there's nothing you can do about it either. And that's what they do. They're really good at it too. But if you're an honest person and you got a moral high ground, and you didn't do nothing wrong by being honest, then you can go ahead and do it. But it ain't going to be easy. Estimated radio silver released from Chernobyl. Again, everything is meant to downplay it. Background radiation measurements in the lower atmosphere before and after Chernobyl. Impact on Western Europe. Sampling in Chernobyl forest. Bioaccumulation of radioactive cesium in marine mammals in the Baltic Sea. Cesium strontium to coastal Syrian mountains after Chernobyl. Seeds in the 30-kilometer zone, and that's the only thing left for birds to eat. There's the seeds because there's no insects. Resuspension around Chernobyl, and every time there's a forest fire, you radiate. Everything again is liberated back into the environment. I'm always taken aback by the evilness of this industry. Let's boogie through the rest of them, maybe. Like lakes and sediment systems of their fresh water in the United Kingdom, Columbia, UK. That's the most frightening statement imaginable. Examination of the destructive forces into Chernobyl. Countermeasures diminish the radiation doses of Chernobyl population, so that you can't countermeasure and diminish the radiation doses of a population. It's airborne. You're breathing it. It's in your water. You're drinking it. So the only solution really is you're supposed to evacuate the country after a nuclear accident. Well, all nuclear power plants are hemorrhaging radiation into the ecosystem 24 hours a day. So, like a nuclear power plant, once you take the fuel out of the reactor and put it in the fuel pool, it's going to still splitting atoms into the ecosystem. So the nuclear plant is going to, let's say, to boil a glass of water, you're going to look at an absurd amount of isotopes, atoms, to boil that water, right? Anthropogenic, man-made. So imagine how much it takes to boil water to power the homes and businesses of 1 million people. How many atoms does it take? Well, it's more than all the stars in the solar system that we can calculate. So, but once you take it out of the reactor, it doesn't stop splitting atoms. It's still splitting those atoms, just not under huge pressure and temperatures anymore. Still very warm. And the fuel pools are boiling off, each one of them, there's about 1,000 worldwide, are boiling off a plume 24 hours a day, that just a plume on its own would cover a lot of the planet in radioactive fallout. So it's a perpetual disease and misery machine. That's what a nuclear plant is. And when you got 1,000 of them doing that to you, fuel pools, because each reactor has 2 fuel pools. Then you got all the government reactors, the national laboratories in different countries. But then you got to put in all the dumping that they've done. And not just the accidents, which are just on their own a planet killer in increments over time. They're guaranteed to wipe out the species. And when you look at the real picture of the harm of 80 years of unmitigated emissions and hid by very highly educated people with incredible degrees, and who's the politician going to believe? They're going to believe these people, or they're going to believe Dana? Now, but if they look at, because they only look at one study, right, or 2 studies, they don't look at several hundred like you've done tonight. When you look at the several hundred, then you're left with this one haunting question. If nuclear attacks every facet of the ecosystem, the biosphere, is it here in order to exterminate all the species in increments over time? Is that the end game? And then the only answer there is yes, obviously. Did they know what they were doing back in the day? No. Did they know within a decade? Yes. Did they really truly understand every facet of this? What do you think? All of these studies tonight, when they say, well, there's not enough information on how harmful it is to this or that or these, that's 100% not true. They didn't spend all this money on all these studies. And remember, this is just a fraction. And if you go back to last year's Chernobyl anniversary, or the year before Chernobyl anniversary, or in between, you're going to find another show like this where it's nothing but these types of studies. They're all different studies than what I'm showing you tonight, by the way. And there's around 900 of them. So take those 900 studies and take, I don't know how many studies we got here tonight, 400 or 500 probably. And every one of them are different facets of the ecosystem. Then the only conclusion you got, unfortunately, is the right conclusion, that this is a omnicide machine, and it's on a countdown timer to exterminate all species. It has no other job, really, only to exterminate all species and blame it on climate change or something like that to manipulate you. Because the attack is you. It's your children, it's your friends, your family, it's the 8 million species. That's what this is all about. It's about exterminating everything in increments, so you don't even, it's the pot and cold water. You put it on the stove, turn the heat on low, let it warm up, and every 20 minutes turn the heat up a little bit more till the frog boils. The frog doesn't jump out because he doesn't know, so to speak, right? Of course, the frog will jump out, but it's human hair radioactivity. That's a great study, you know. If you go to Japan, you should cut your hair off right away and wear a cap and a hoodie over it, so the radiation doesn't stick to your clothing. Throw your clothing away every day. Throw your shoes away every day. When you come back in, put it in a bag and throw it away right away. Throw all your clothing away. Get a 5 or 6 hour shower every day. Try to get the radiation off your body. This is an industry of scumbags, degenerate monsters, and sadistic demons, yeah? And don't eat mushrooms, for goodness sakes. They're one of the biggest bioaccumulators of radiation on this entire planet. We can't have many left now. There can only be 5 or 10 left after this line. Chernobyl's dirty legacy lives on. Dispersion models applied to long-range transport of radionuclides from Chernobyl. The dispersal models actually shows that the radiation covers the entire planet. All the models of, say, Chernobyl, of Fukushima, shows the same thing. And France's government model is one of the better complete models. Just look at this model of Fukushima. And so it doesn't matter Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, whatever. When the plume starts, and say the plume is emitting, this is 15 days or something after tsunami, 10 days after. So this is 20 days after tsunami, but 15 days after the meltdowns. So within 15 days, your whole planet is covered in radioactive fallout. This model from France is based upon, of Fukushima, is based on 1 million to 10 million atoms of cesium-137. But it's a flawed model. It's not based on the actual inventories that were lost. It's not based on the 4 reactors that melted down and the 8 fuel pools. It's based on venting. And it never goes away. It's like an invisible snowstorm that never stops snowing. Snow never melts, and the snow never goes away, and it still snows 24 hours a day forever. Because then you would get it, obviously, right? But because you can't see it, or smell it, or hear it, or feel it, or taste it, or pick it up, or perceive it, right, you become incredibly complacent. And when you turn to the academic community to educate you, they'll educate you the opposite way. They'll educate you into propaganda, and because it's such a difficult subject for the average person, right, it's very difficult for them to know when they're being lied to. And when you got all these people telling you a lie, well, it doesn't seem that way, right, if you don't have another alternative, and they ain't going to give you another alternative. But when you look at the big picture, why are they studying every facet, every single facet? Why are they studying every single facet of the ecosystem? For something that is like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine and climbing a mountain and flying on an airplane or eating peanut butter or in 15 minutes in a kayak. They got all of these 80 years of this same propaganda, see? That's 80 years of bananas, saying it's like a banana and a potato chip. It's harmless, is what they're saying to you, right? Oh, it's so good for you. They even got studies like that out there saying it's good for you. But it has no redeeming qualities whatsoever. How did we do tonight? Did we get through it? I do believe we did. I think we punched in 3 hours. Oh my goodness. Well, we done what we done. I can't turn that clock back. That's the way it goes. Let's close the poll down, I guess. Despite Chernobyl's deadly effects, should it be demoted to the second worst nuclear meltdown after Fukushima? And I only got 35 votes tonight, 35 likes, my goodness. For a 3-hour show. Not that we don't expect it, but that's just an incredibly low number. So we appreciate everybody that participated in the vote. A lot of you probably weren't counted, unfortunately. I'll turn that down a bit. And what time is it? It's 1:15 a.m. my time. 1:15 a.m. Yeah, good night, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Have a great weekend. Hopefully I don't see you till Sunday. Unless there's an event, right? Unless we have a major nuclear event. Yeah. I don't think I got... Yeah. Thanks, Dana, by the way. Hi, Dana. Albert, Don, everybody. Good night, everybody. Bruce, Richard. Colette. Don Vincent. John. I know it's been a long night. My apologies to everybody. Kevin Blanche. James Lucid. Hi, James. Maritime Slave. I'll just scroll up for a few moments here. Quick shout out to people. We get an extra couple of minutes out of it. And yeah, I went in to get a cheap grinder today, which would make my work a lot easier. And they were all gone. James Box. I know Stephen Young is there too. He's just finished his last infusion yesterday or today. I think it was yesterday, but it could be today for the next month. So it's going to take him probably the whole month to recover from that experience for 3 days, 4.5 hours a day, I believe it was. And he's already struggling, right? So our heart goes out to Stephen. And he's lovely, of course. Something in the water. I'm just scrolling up through the comments that I can see on my end. I don't have all the comments. Will be in my. That's the end of them for me there. I don't have all the comments in my control room. I probably have half the comments or something. I just want to do a quick shout out to everybody before we call it a night because it's Friday. Alrighty. You know when you're doing these long shows, it's so hard to call it a night. But we're going to call it a night. Hugs for everybody. Have a great night. Have a great day tomorrow. Have a great day Saturday. We'll see you Sunday. Alright? Okay? Take care, folks.